continue to contribute to today. So I just wanted to quickly set the stage, and then I also introduce our two guest speakers from Desert Research Institute today. Before I did that, though, I also wanted to quickly introduce Mr. Matt Boggs. Matt is an employee of Naval Air Weapons Center Weapons Division, and he has been an integral part of the Navy's ability to do this project with DRI. So thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Greg Pohl and Ms. Jenny Chapman from Desert Research Institute for today's presentation. Thank you.
Is the clicker? Thank you, Commander and board members, for allowing us to speak today. So, again, I'm Greg Pohl with the Desert Research Institute, and we're here today to talk about the groundwater model that we developed for the Indian Wells Valley. This first figure here shows really why we're here, and it's the declining groundwater levels in the valley. This is an example of one such well where the water levels from, in this case, from 1945 to roughly present, perhaps which assumptions might need to be changed a little bit. As a part of that, we did a very comprehensive analysis of the groundwater recharge, how much water is infiltrating into the ground, and also how much is discharging as evapotranspiration. We collected a variety of data for both of those different processes. We improved what's known as the grid resolution. These models are broken up into a series of squares. The previous model was on about a quarter-mile grid. We reduced that or improved the resolution to 820 feet. So we're calculating water levels basically every 820 feet in the valley. I have this other bullet here, Newton Solver. Basically what that is saying is that we're using the most updated software available for the modeling process. And then also we did what's called a recalibration. Once we entered all this new data, we have to adjust some of the parameters to make sure that the model is in agreement with the measured values, the measured water levels in the valley. And in addition to that, we thought it would be important, because we were looking at groundwater quality issues, to employ or to construct a solute transport model to look at the salt movement in the system to see when the wells might be impacted by salt. We also created a subsidence model so we can make predictions about subsidence into the future. And then we addressed conceptual model uncertainty by looking at different alternatives, particularly alternatives relative to where the recharge is occurring in the system, and also some conceptual models relative to the underlying geology in the system. And then, of course, we use the model to create future predictions of drawdown, and we're going to talk about that today. Now, it's probably most important before we talk about any modeling, is just to talk about the water budget for this valley. I'm going to break this water budget into two different components, time components. We're going to first talk about the early 1900s, in this case 1920. And the reason this is important is this is prior to any significant pumping in the valley. And then next I'll talk about current conditions. But in 1920, what we found from our research is there's approximately 7,700 acre-feet per year that's recharging the groundwater system. That's what is shown in that blue bar to the left. The air bar, the red line associated with that bar, represents all of the other estimates of recharge for the valley. As you can see, some are higher, some are lower. But if you look at them in a little bit more detail, there's been about a dozen recharge studies for the valley. Those prior to about the year 2000 tend to be a little bit higher, upwards of about 10,000 acre-feet per year. Those after 2000, using newer technology, tend to be a little bit lower, closer to 77, between, say, 7,000 and 8,000 acre-feet per year. Moving on, prior to significant pumping, most of the water was discharged as evaporation or transpiration at or around the playa area. Again, as I said earlier, there's a little bit of interbasin flow towards the Salt Wells Valley. And even in 1920, there was a small amount of domestic pumping on the order of 1,200 acre-feet per year. Now let's contrast that to the current time. In particular, 2015. Again, the recharge remains relatively constant, although it does change with the climate. But on a long-term average, again, it's on the order of 7,000 to 8,000 acre-feet per year. There's now this new bar is what we're calling storage. And what that means is as water levels decline, that lowers the water table. You're actually deriving water from groundwater storage, and that's what's supplying a majority of the water for wells. As the water levels decline, Some of the water levels go below the actual root zone for many of the plants, so evapotranspiration will decline as well. So it went from maybe 6 to about 4,000 acre-feet per year. The amount going towards Searles Valley or Salt Wells Valley is roughly the same at about 200 acre-feet per year. But more importantly, let's look at that last bar. That's groundwater pumping. It is on the order of 28,000 acre-feet per year. So the groundwater pumping is well in excess of what is actually coming in, on the order of 3 to 4 times more. So even though we do have air bars in terms of both recharge and pumping, because some of the pumping estimate values are estimated, you can see that there's a significant difference between what is coming in and what is actually going out. This is basically the same look, kind of zoomed in from a time perspective on the pumping. You can see from 1920 to, in this case, 2012, there was a significant increase in groundwater pumping from near zero prior to 1920 to upwards of 25 to 28,000 acre-feet per year presently. Okay, now let's move on to the groundwater model. As I said before, we started with the Brown and Caldwell model that was published in the 2000s. We made some adjustments to it, and we performed some additional calibration by looking at some very field-specific hydrogeologic data. When we incorporated that data, we were able to reduce the model air from 7.5 feet to just under 2 feet. Sometimes we also represent the model air in terms of a relative air. That's what is shown just on top of the bar there. So the relative air for the Brown and Caldwell model was 5%. This current model is below 2%. And generally we say if a model relative air is less than 10%, the model is acceptable and can be used for predictive purposes. So I think the point here is that the model is very well calibrated and it's a very good predictive tool. Not to say that you can't continue to update it, improve it, particularly for localized areas. Now, we also look at not only the pre-development condition, that is before a lot of pumping, to calibrate the model, but we have to also calibrate the model over time as the water levels change throughout time. The Brown and Caldwell model actually did pretty good, but there was some bias or some errors, particularly in the Ridgecrest area, and that is what is shown in that figure to the right. In that blue area, the water level, the predicted water levels were about 40 feet too high, and in that red area, they were about 40 feet too low. So there was this sort of this mismatch in that area that we tried to correct. So let's look at some of the fits between the simulated and measured water levels. So that is what is shown on the right. We call this a hydrograph. So on the x-axis, we have time from 1920, because that's when the model starts, up to essentially present time. And then on the left is just a map showing in the red box where this well actually is. So the blue line shows the simulated water levels, and then the red dots show the actual measurements. So at this particular well, we're doing quite well. The observations are off by about 1 foot on average. But more importantly, what we're trying to do here is to try to match the slope. That is, how rapidly are the water levels falling? So in some cases, we're able to match the slope or the water level decline quite well, like as an example, moving eastward just a little bit. But in this case, we're off in the absolute predictive capability by 15 feet. But again, our objective was to match the overall trend, and in this case, we did quite well. Now, if we were to look at all of the wells over the entire valley to see how well the model is doing, that is what is shown here. And on average, the model is able to predict water level declines to about plus or minus 0.3 feet per year, which is pretty good. Now, if you look at the color coding on that map, that shows you where the model is doing well and where it's doing perhaps a little bit more poorly. The cool colors represent an area where you're matching water level trends on the order of that 0.3 feet per year or less. But as you moved south and westerly toward the El Paso Basin, you can see those warmer colors where the model is not performing as well. So we think there's issues either with faulting or some geology that we don't have 100% correct in the model, and we're currently trying to refine the model to fix these errors in that particular region. But for the most part, in the majority of the valley, we're doing quite well. Now, what we did is after we calibrated the model and felt comfortable with it, we used the model to simulate 3 different scenarios into the future to see how water levels might change. The first makes sense. We just simulated a status quo condition. So this is basically just allowing current pumping to continue out into the future with a modest population growth and allowing some of the younger pistachio trees to mature. Once they mature, they're going to use a little bit more water, so there'll be a little bit more pumping associated with those areas. Secondly, we did a status quo pumping analysis, but we allowed for an isolation between the deep and shallow aquifers. So basically what this means is we don't have 100% detail of what's in the subsurface, so we allowed the model to have significant clay lenses basically between the upper and the lower aquifers. This sort of isolates those 2 areas, and we wanted to see what would happen if we performed that exercise. And then lastly, we allowed for a climate change simulation with a slight reduction in precipitation. So let's look at some results. This is at one NOS well. So this is one of the high production wells associated with that the Navy is using for water supply. Again, this is a hydrograph showing the x-axis is time, and on the y-axis is groundwater level. And what you're seeing is those 3 different simulations, the trends in the water level behavior. The upper 2 represent the status quo and the climate change simulations. So the take-home message from that is that although if you do have a slight decrease in precipitation due to climate change effects, it really doesn't have a really significant impact in terms of water levels in the future. And the reason for that is the bathtub, the size of the valley, is quite large. So if you change the input just a little bit, it doesn't have a huge effect. But it does have a pretty large effect if you allow for this isolation between the deep and shallow aquifers. You can see there's a significant water level declines into the future. So the point of this was to say, well, we should probably investigate the extent of some of these clay layers to make sure we understand exactly where they are and their ultimate impact on water levels for the municipal wells. Okay, and then we can also make predictions in space. So what this plot is showing for 2 different time periods. On the left, we have 25 years into the future, and then on the right, 100 years in the future. What is the expected drawdown at various locations throughout the valley? If you look 25 years into the future, you can see that drawdown levels are on the order of 10 to 40 feet or so. As you would expect, the higher water level declines are associated with areas of significant pumping. If you move 100 years into the future, you can see that water level declines are on the order of 50 to as much as, I believe, 120 to 130 feet in these areas where you have significant pumping occurring. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Jenny Chapman, to talk about the TDS model. The right one advances.
Okay. Thank you. So just like Greg started with the graph showing the water level decreasing in a well as the motivation for concern regarding water supply, water quantity, then what's shown on this graph is the salinity, the water quality in one of a well in the Ridgecrest area. The data are from the U.S. Geological Survey. And you can see that through time, in some wells, there's been a noted increase in salinity. And so there's a concern about water quality within the basin as well. And to address that, then, we adapted the flow model to then become a transport model whereby we could move salt salinity around and see what the potential forecasts are for that. Now, where is the saline water located? This is the map, shows the model boundary again in blue in the entire valley. The blue colors are low salinity, very high quality water. As you get into the warmer colors, red, then it's very saline water. And the saline water is associated with the eastern part of the valley near the playa area where all the evaporation is occurring. You also have pockets of poorer quality, higher salinity water within the valley proper that are associated essentially with geothermal areas and also with fine-grained clay lenses, which can be interbedded in the areas that you have better quality water. So if you have pumping, then that can draw the water and the salt from any of these three sources of salinity and reduce the water quality. We use the water quality information then into the model and at the specific wells where we had the data, and then interpolated between that to essentially make a map throughout the model area of salinity. And shown on the left-hand side is the the starting situation for salinity in the shallower aquifer system. The purple area is very high-quality water, and then you can see the reduction in water quality as you go to the east toward the discharge area and toward the north where some of those geothermal areas are. So we took the same flow model and then with this salinity starting point pumped for 85 years to the year 2100 to see how the salinity distribution would change, and that's what's shown on the right-hand side. And you can see that kind of in the big picture, there's not a dramatic change, and that's because the basin is large, the flow rates are relatively low. And so, if you look at it, you can tell that high-quality area has reduced in size somewhat. There's a little bit of incursion over from the saline water, but it's not, from a valley-wide perspective, large. However, it does depend on exactly where you are in terms of what that impact would be. You see two red squares on that map to the right, and we're going to look at those in a little more detail. The first one is, again, a NAS supply well, and the graph on the left-hand side is the time running forward in the model from the present day through that 85-year period, and then on the vertical axis is the salinity. So you can see that the salinity is increasing, but in a very minor amount in that 85 years. There's an increase of about 40 milligrams per liter that's predicted, which would not be of any significance in terms of the use. The other thing that's notable is that the starting point for the salinity of that water is in the 200s. I can't see the exact number, but it's quite good to begin with, and that slight increase is not a problem. The second well is located in the eastern part of Ridgecrest, and it begins at a poorer water quality to begin with, over 400 milligrams per liter, and the increase that's seen in that well is considerably more, over almost 300 milligrams per liter. And so that increase in 85 years would be of a significant impact in that well. So the take-home story on that is that the location of your well is of importance in trying to determine what the impact on your overall water quality is. And I should note that this is not including the salt loading that Mr. Parker was discussing earlier. And then the third thing that we looked at, in addition to water quantity and water quality, was the impact of water withdrawals on subsidence. And this can happen as a result of aquifer dewatering. Just as we need water levels and data to be able to parameterize the flow model, then when we look at subsidence, we need data also. The data that we began with was from what's called INSAR, which is essentially a satellite radar-based method that looks at elevation at one time and then compares it to another time and analyzes the difference. And then we use that information to calibrate the groundwater model to make predictions of subsidence into the future. The INSAR data are shown on the map on the left-hand side. The red color is the areas of higher subsidence, the blue is less subsidence. And the area that is shown was what was available from the radar data in order to make the calculations. Due to cloud cover and other issues, it couldn't cover the entire model domain. That data were used to calibrate the groundwater model subsidence simulations, which are shown on the right-hand side. And again, kind of from just a big perspective, you can see that we were able to match the general magnitude of observed subsidence pretty well. However, when you look in detail, there are several issues, and one of those is that the location of the subsidence is not matched, is really not matched very well. Interestingly enough, on the INSAR observations, the main area of subsidence is not located directly associated with the pumping wells. It's displaced up there just a little bit to the northeast. And on that map, you also see purple lines. Those are fault lines. And that subsidence bowl is kind of in between a couple of fault lines, which in itself suggests that there may actually be what we call a tectonic control or some sort of earth motion that may be contributing to the differences in elevation that are observed as opposed to just strict groundwater pumping subsidence. The predictions from the groundwater flow model are entirely as a result only of the pumping simulations. And as a result, they are centered exactly on the pumping areas. So we have that main subsidence bowl displaced over onto the pumping wells, as well as we're predicting subsidence up in the agricultural area, which was not observed in the NSAR at all. So in total, though we're kind of matching the general magnitude, we feel like there's enough uncertainty in the modeling that we're not catching either tectonic forces or detailed stratigraphy, clay lens locations that are important to that actually in total we don't think that the model is a very effective way of predicting the subsidence. So pulling it all together then, including the water quantity issues that Greg spoke about, over a management horizon of about 25 to 50 years, we would not expect from our simulations that the deep production wells are going to be significantly impacted. The reason for this is that these wells are very deep, and they're screened intervals, which is the area in the subsurface that the water is produced from, is well below the water table. So even though the water table is declining steadily through time, it's got there's a lot of water there, and those screens are really deep. And that's a terrific advantage, because what that gives you is a significant amount of time to institute any sort of management approaches and controls to address that overall decline. And whereas that's true for the production wells with their greater depth, the model forecast suggests that there are going to be some serious functional problems for shallower wells, and these would be most of the domestic wells. And in particular, the drawdown map that Greg was showing, those higher levels of drawdown on the western side of the valley, any shallower domestic wells that are in that area are definitely going to be running into some functional problems, if not running dry, over this same 25 to 50 year period when the major production wells should be fine. We don't foresee that there's going to be widespread, significant water quality degradation, but as noted in particular areas, that indeed can be a problem, particularly over on the eastern side of Ridgecrest. And then finally, subsidence is expected and is likely to increase, but we don't feel like the model was a very good way of looking at that. So where to go from here? The commander did a good job of introducing the fact that a model is not just something that's finished and done. It's actually a tool. It can be improved with the addition of new information that comes into it. And as well, it can be used as a tool to evaluate different scenarios, concepts, ideas, management plans. And so it's something that can be changed, adjusted to answer the questions that you have as managers to help guide decision making. It can be improved, but overall, those improvements we would say can help to match the fit in individual areas, localized issues, but the big picture of how the entire basin is operating is unlikely to change as a result of the overall controls of how much is coming in and how much is going out, because those things are actually pretty well pinned down. And we would recommend in regard to the subsidence that subsidence monitoring through the NSAR measurements and actual on-ground measurement of leveling would be a wise approach to take. And then finally, we had a kind of a NAWS specific recommendation for them monitoring some water levels next to their production wells.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your presentation. Let's go to the board first before we go to the public and see if there are any preliminary questions from board members. Mr. Brown?
I got 4 questions, but they're probably really cakewalk for you to answer. the early 20s, where you're starting with your data, I'm assuming the data sets were pretty small because of the 20s. There was probably like a stagecoach well or something like that, or an early farm. So you just want me to ask one at a time? You can
Sure.
answer them? Okay.
I might forget if you go through them.
Okay.
Yeah, there wasn't as much data, but interestingly enough, there were probably on the order of 20 or 30 wells, maybe a few more. And there was actually an ET study that was done, evapotranspiration study that was done in those early days. So that was very helpful. That's why we started with 1920.
That's good. Is there an average transmissivity? I know that the ground is different everywhere, and you talk about clay lenses, but is there like a number you could say was homogeneous or something where you could say on the average, like your trend, is there an average transmissivity where we start, coming down gradient, how fast the water flows?
Yeah, I mean, you could speak to an average transmissivity, but there's so much heterogeneity or variability in the system, it probably doesn't have a lot of meaning. I mean, you can think of some of the lower transmissivity areas being associated with the clay deposits near the playa, and then there are very specific coarse deposits in specific parts of the valley. It's hard to discuss without a map, but so to answer your question, an average probably isn't all that helpful.
So, like, if you're on an alluvial fan or something, obviously the transmissivity would probably be much higher than, and the gradient would be different as well. So
that's correct. Yeah.
So if I wanted to look for that information, would it be on the report someplace? The transmissivity?
It is. We actually refer. Well, transmissivity is the product of the hydraulic conductivity or the permeability and the thickness.
Right.
We have maps of hydraulic conductivity in the report.
Okay. Sorry, I got to get my glasses back out. Is there a way, an average water quality degradation? Is it linear? I mean, your map kind of looked like it would sequentially, like, infiltrate this way from the higher concentrates. Is it fairly linear? Because I'm familiar, in my data might be wrong, but there was like a place that the water district, I'm the water district, that we had a farm, and it had alfalfa for a very, very long time. And then all of a sudden the TDS levels changed dramatically up into the 2000 range. And so on your models, it looks like it's kind of, like the blob, like it's progressing. But from what I was explained to by somebody else, that once you change that pressure above that salt water, it can kind of cork up, not in a geologic sense, but much faster. And that was kind of like the explanation for that anomaly. Is that something possible anywhere else, or is that just an anomaly?
I can't speak to the case that you're mentioning of it just being a very sudden change. That's certainly not what the model's simulating. And it's actually a fairly small number of wells that have a very clear salinity increase within the valley.
Right.
And those don't exhibit a step
They're just
change. It's definitely been, creeping up with time, very similar to the way that the model showed it. I mean, in general, of course, salt water has a higher density, so it doesn't tend to rise up or to do something like that. But the presence of there being saltier water associated with these clay lenses could offer the opportunity that once it finally breaks through, that there might be a larger increase. 1,000 milligrams per liter sounds like a lot, though, so that seems like a very special circumstance.
Well, it went up to like 2,000. It was in the Neal Ranch area in Brown Road.
And that is an interesting area that, in one explanation that I've read regarding the poorer quality water that occurs there, is that actually there is some indication of geothermal activity at depth. So yeah, you may have just essentially broken through to some poorer quality water from there.
Yeah, that was Pierre Santamana is the one that explained that to me. The last question I had was, is there an average depth of domestic wells? Because you're predicting, your model's fairly linear, a foot to a little less than a foot. A lot of the wells were put in around the same time frames, between the 70s and the 80s. And obviously nobody dug that much deeper than you wanted to because it cost per foot of drilling. Is there like an estimate or an understanding of, like, are most domestic wells like 300 feet deep? I mean,
we actually weren't able to find a ready database of domestic well construction. I believe Kern County has a lot of that information in their databases, but we weren't able to query those effectively. And what we really wound up relying on was the work that Todd Engineers did, and that was published in 2014. They didn't say the average depth, but what they did say was that there was an average of about 75 feet of freeboard between the water level and the well screens as an average in the wells that they surveyed. Clearly, they were able to look at some sampling, at least, of well construction. And so and that is what led essentially to our second conclusion there, that the domestic wells are at risk over this time period because, you've only got an average of about 75 feet to work at, and as you begin to draw down close to that screen level, then you'll get operational issues with your well.
70 years later.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other board? Yes, sir.
Do you expect that further study will result in substantial revisions to the water budget?
My opinion is no, that it will not. There's already been a dozen studies related to groundwater recharge, and in the last decade and a half, there's been fairly good consensus at about the 7,000 to 8,000 acre feet per year range. So additional studies can help maybe locate exactly where it's infiltrating, but I don't think you're going to have a drastic change in the volumetric water budget.
Yeah, this water budget looks similar to what was presented in the Todd report.
It's pretty close. We made some adjustments based upon our measurements of evapotranspiration and additional recharge analysis.
And there's no expectation that big picture story in your first couple of bar charts is going to change.
Not in my opinion, no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, before we go to the public, I just want to comment on Commander Longbottom, your statement about the Navy's participation in our effort here. We are acutely aware of the restrictions and the difficulties with the Navy's participation. We are also acutely thankful and appreciate the significant contributions that the Navy has made continuously for the past, I don't know how many years, and we're looking forward to that continued collaboration and whatever we can do to support you. We're all aboard that.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I think, to echo, what the experts are saying, we don't anticipate the big picture changing. But there is certainly some data gaps that we have, potential domestic well data gaps that we're currently and will continue working. We've set aside money in 17. We're budgeting for money in 18 and moving forward. I mean, our intent is to assist the team here in maintaining this model with the data we capture and to help have a predictive tool. So moving forward, we're making smart decisions as a group. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm sure we're going to have more questions for you, but before we do, any other from the board before we go to the public? Okay, let's open this up for the public hearing. If you two could grab a seat right there, you're probably going to get some questions, and we'll call you up when we get a chance. If you want to make a comment on it, please filter to your right and come on down and speak your piece. Okay. Introduce yourself and speak your piece. Thank you.
My name is Jim Heiser. I live at 1768 West Bowman. I've read your document. I read it over Christmas. It was extremely enjoyable, but some of the details you've said.
Please speak in the microphone.
Some of the details you said I couldn't find in the document. None of your basic files were plotted, nor your DIS files, or references to which versions you were running or anything like that, along with the material characteristics. The problem I see is we're sitting on a nice piece of land here. It's nice and green outside. Dennis has made sure that the compaction here is 95%, and it's got lots of clay in it, which means basically nothing goes through it. Stuff grows on top. But I don't see you pulling that out of your model as far as your basic file is usually the easiest to pull it out, or you have to then go to your UPW file and put in some weird soil characteristics. None of that information I found in your document. Can we talk offline, or I'm
what we'll do, Ms. Heiser, is we'll collect your statements, and at the end of the public hearing, we'll allow these people an opportunity to respond.
Okay.
So, do you got that question? Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
The other thing is you were only using one weather station, according to your document, which the weather station here is a nice weather station. It usually gets us about 3 inches a year. The one up in Walker Pass gives us about 9 inches. So there's a lot of variability, along with, are you using the SPIE model, which we know has problems? We measure an inch of evaporation down here every day. They predict a 1/4 inch. Now, what they don't have in their model is wind, which is nice, it's great, but it's a factor of 4 multiplier. So that means the evaporation is drastically different. And again, these are Oregon people trying to tell us desert people how rain is evaporated based on their Oregon experience, which is low wind and not very dynamic. We do have a significant altitude variation. We typically have around 8 degrees per thousand to 5 degrees per thousand temperature change. And we have a lot of holes where we're actually saying a weather station is representing 30 or 40 square miles. So we're kind of having a lot of extreme modeling issues in trying to model the valley. First thing is you throw out 250,000 acres because you're putting concrete down, you're making them meet a 95% compaction, you're making them do this, and there's clay all over. Basically below 3,000 feet, it's 90% of the time it's clay. There's only one place where we found some good sand. It's where the old river used to go underground to leave the valley back in 1908.
Mr. Heeser, thank you very much. Are you done with your questions?
Those are the basic ones.
Thank you. Let's try to keep this concise as we can and complete answers. You put a timer on.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Thomas.
I have 12 handouts that I've given there. One for Lauren Duffy, who takes the minutes. I'll also present to our presenters. I have 4 main questions.
And state your name, please, Ms. Thomas.
Donna Thomas, and these are individual comments of my own. I reviewed the document over the holidays. Question 1, there seems to be a swap from Sierra Nevada North and Sierra Nevada South recharge figures from the Brown and Caldwell Model 2009, described on page 12, and the groundwater model being developed for this study on page 13. Is there an explanation for the swap of the figures? And I listed those in my comment paper. Question 2, page 24, section 4.6.1, entitled Reduced Recharge in the El Paso Basin, describes the reasoning for reducing the recharge from the El Paso Basin and the Sierra Nevada South recharge for a combined amount of 150 acre feet per year down to 100 acre feet per year. And the explanation is well, they say that there's a barrier there, a groundwater barrier that prevents 100% barrier for any groundwater flow from those areas. So my question is, why is the combined recharge amount counted and included in the total recharge when the report states on page 24 there's a barrier of 100% of groundwater flow, and that the groundwater recharge originating in El Paso Basin and including the Sierra Nevada South should not be counted as recharge to the Indian Wells Valley? When I review maps, I see that there are 5 canyons included in the Sierra Nevada South mountain block, and I've attached a map to my comments. Freeman Gulch, Cow Heaven, Sage Canyon, Horse Canyon, Bird Springs Canyon. My question is, where does the recharge from those canyons go since it is blocked from entering the Indian Wells Valley. I'm also referencing maps and figures. Figure 8, page 47, showing the 6 mountain block recharge zones, and figure 20 on page 59, with an arrow showing southwest tide gradient region. Okay, and then I put a quote from page 24, but I don't need to read that. Okay, my other questions are pretty short. Will the groundwater model described in the report be updated if the USGS recharge study shows totals that differ from those in this report? Question 4, does this report and groundwater model address imported water and exported water, or can it be modified to do so? Thank you for allowing questions.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Those are some good questions in there. We'll get some answers to you.
So let me just explain what goes in the report. Okay, so you have 3 minutes, and it's going to be green, and then with 1 minute left, it's going to turn to yellow, and then it will then go red. And I've stopped the meeting on those issues that are in question, but it will be. So just be aware, you might really have to ask. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman and other board members. My name is Anthony Brown. I'm speaking here as I have some questions from the Harvey Pistachios that I direct through the Chairman of the board here. Firstly, a comment. I would like to thank DRI for what, as a technical person, I view as an excellent piece of work. The modelling exercise is very well done, and also like to thank the Navy for funding such an exercise. I have basically 3 lines of questions. The first gets to a comment you made about that the Indian Wells Valley is essentially a very big bathtub. The questions related to that would be, how deep was the deepest layer within the model? And also, what was the total volume of groundwater that's currently in storage within the Indian Wells Valley as quantified within the model? The second question relates to one of the conclusions you had. You made a comment that there will be problems with domestic wells moving into the future with the continued pumping. To make such a conclusion, you would obviously have to have information about those wells, such as their depth, the screened interval, the pump bowl depth, etc. So the question would be, did you have that information? If the answer is yes, is it in the report? If the answer is no, the first point is, wouldn't that information be extremely valuable to have, and shouldn't there be an effort made to collect that information? The second point is, if you don't have it, how can you make such a conclusion? The third question relates to the subsidence. I noted from the INSAR data between 1982 and 2000, I believe, was the spread of the INSAR data. That was a period when there was increased pumping, increased within the Indian Wells Valley. But the INSAR data showed no subsidence or significant subsidence at all related to the actual pumping areas. Given that, how can we conclude that continued pumping would result in subsidence? Those would be the 3 lines of questions I have.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. We're going to get you answers.
Gene McMurtry. I'll be very brief. I just wanted to make sure that I understood the numbers. If I heard correctly, there's an annual recharge of 7,000 acre feet, annual pumping of about 28,000 acre feet, difference being 21,000 acre feet. My question would be, in the absence of an imported supply, in order to have a sustainable basin, do you have to reduce pumping from 28,000 down to 21? Excuse me, down to 7. Are you off by 21,000 acre feet? That's the question.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning. My name is Eddie Teasdale, and these are questions that Meadowbrook had.
Could you give me your name one more time?
Yeah, Eddie Teasdale. And they're related to the calibration of the flow and then the transient model, the freight and transport model. On the transient calibration, you mentioned that you looked at trying to match 73 of the 562 monitoring wells. I guess the question is, was that all you looked at? And then what portion of those were shallow versus deep? So that was the first part of the question. And then the second question is on the freight and transport model, was there any kind of verification done with the freight and transport model before you used it as a predictive tool? So was there, just to build some confidence in its predictive ability before you ran it out for a couple of years? Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Dan Rotora, good evening, or pardon me, it's not City Council. Good morning. I have two comments and or questions. The first comment has to do with, I know that we are trying to get organized here within the GSA, and eventually we're going to have a technical advisory committee, and I'm curious whether or not it's the intent of this group for the TAC team to actually review this document and provide comments to the Navy so that if they do an update to the study, that the comments from the entire community can get into that report. I think it's very important that we expand the knowledge base that we have so that everybody gets to have an input. The second comment and or question is I was looking at Appendix A1, which shows the performance of the calibration on various wells. And as the gentleman put up, there were several wells that looked very good where the calibration was right on top of the observed data. However, there were also a number of wells in the Appendix A1 where the model was 200, 300, 400 feet away from the model, that is the observed numbers, and also the rate at which the water level was decreasing. The observed levels were basically flat, and the model profile was ever decreasing, and it stopped at 2010 or 2015. And it didn't even show what it was expected to do after that point in time. So I guess my feeling is, even though it was claimed that there was an excellent match between the model and the observed data, the Appendix A1 and many of those, not all of them, but enough that it's hard to believe the match that was described up here. So and one last thing is, it turns out that all of the Appendix A1 data was based upon the actual control points that were used to calibrate the data. I saw no comparison of the model to any of the monitor wells that were not part of the calibration. And that would be the true evaluation of whether or not the model was correct. Once you have the model, that model should predict all of the monitoring wells, not just the ones that were used for the calibration. And I didn't see any of that data in there at all. So I was wondering if that was done, and if it was, what did it show? Thank you.
Mr. Torr, we'll get to that. Well, go ahead, Mr. Commander Longbottom.
Mr. Torr, if I could ask real quick, could you provide which specific graphs in Appendix A1 you're referring to afterwards?
Sure.
So we could reference. I was just thumbing through real quick, and the ones that I see being off are the ones that they indicated in the overlay were in the yellow and red southwest ring. But
They were primarily the ones in the south, as I recall. I don't have my data with me. I could thumb, if you have it here, I could thumb through it real quick. And
just so we're talking the same thing, sir.
But it is, you're absolutely right. It's the red and yellow ones in the south.
Yes, sir.
And those actually, it's not the real south, because it turns out there were no wells that were part of the calibration in the bottom, and very few at the top. But the ones that were inconsistent definitely were the southern portion, the yellow and the red, and they're toward the end of Appendix A1.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Paul Nugent. I'd like to thank the Navy and the Desert Research Institute. I thought the information looked good. A couple of comments that I would say is that it is a model, and with the model we make assumptions, and sometimes those assumptions can be good or they can be bad. And I would just express a hope that the Technical Advisory Committee would have the chance to review the information and make sure that it is sound and before we make large decisions that affect a lot of people, that we have as good a quality of data as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent. Okay. I see no further efforts at public communication or comment, so we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for comment, consideration, and questions. Commander Logbottom.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to, again, emphasize that our purpose in bringing this today and also we released the report, it's posted on the website, was to generate these questions. The model is as good as the data. This is step one in making the presentation to this board. We have every intention of the TAC and the PAC being adamantly involved in how we move forward with this model. So we adamantly seek their input.
Thank you, sir. I got a couple questions. First, I talked about thanking the Navy. My understanding, Commander Longbottom, is that we can use this I just want you to hear it again, that it's a model. What a model is only good as the information coming in, but what we can do is we can build vignettes. We can build scenarios, future scenarios, to suggest to decision makers how best to refine and make decisions based on future scenarios.
Correct.
So we could take, for example, this basin and take every human being out of it. And what is our water table going to do?
Correct.
We could take this model and we could take this basin and say, Navy, go away. Ridgecrest, go away. Ag, go away. Domestic well owner, any combination thereof, and build scenarios to predict water behavior in our aquifer.
The model will not predict Navy going away. I regret to inform you.
Good.
But the rest are correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. I got a couple questions for you regarding what I read in the report is that you have a discharge coming out of our base. We have about 7,700 coming in, and we have a discharge going out to Salt Wells Basin of anywhere between 20 and 200 acre feet a year. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, that is correct.
Is there any other outflows?
Not as in terms of interbasin outflows, no.
Did the study analyze specifically look for outflows? Because the reason I'm asking you that is because we have had other reports where we do have some leakage going into the Fremont Valley. And we're going to see a graph later this morning about a presentation where they believe there is some water leaking into the Fremont Valley.
Yeah, there's no evidence to suggest that there's large amounts of water leaving towards other valleys. Even the one towards Salt Wells Valley, we included it because there was some additional study that showed it. But the geology is such that the bedrock is up close towards the surface, so it doesn't allow for significant transmittal of water to other locations. There could be small amounts to Fremont, but we didn't have the additional detail to get it down to the resolution of, say, 20 to 200.
For me and the rest of us non-hydrologists in the room, could you please explain the difference between deep and shallow aquifers?
It's a bit arbitrary, but what we tried to do in the context of the model and the modeling report is the deeper aquifers were related to the depths of the municipal wells, which were on the order of, I don't have the depths off the top of my head, but let's just say 500, 600, 700 feet deep. And the shallow wells would be shallow aquifer would be associated with domestic wells, 100, maybe 200 feet at max.
How many deep aquifers are there?
Well, I think of the system as one whole system that are interconnected with different types of geology. So I don't like to say that there's 10 aquifers or 5 aquifers or something like that. We tend to categorize into shallow and deep just for simplicity when we're making presentations when we want to focus on municipal wells or domestic wells or so forth.
You heard a lot of people ask a lot of questions, and you took a lot of notes. Could you please go to your notes and answer some of those questions right now?
You want me to answer
yes.
all of them?
Yeah, may I ask one?
Sure, go ahead.
There was a study that I believe it was done by the Navy in the early 1990s. Dr. Frank Monastero had done some isotope studies of where the water went that he predicted was leaving this valley, and found studies that matched water recharged here, the isotope analysis, down into Death Valley. Did you see any of that at all?
We did look at the water chemistry, and there have been a number of very good water chemistry and isotope and carbon dating studies that have been done in the valley. And in general, the issue with things like particularly like isotopes is that they're set by the climatic and elevational conditions of the recharge area. So they're not necessarily unique. You can have an area with identical isotopic composition because their recharge areas had the same sort of elevation and the same sort of climate systems that move through it. So it's not a unique way of being able to identify, but the similarities are nonetheless important. We call that soft data, so it's data that you take in and take into account, but it can't be used to prove something.
All right, thank you.
So, sir, could you go? There were a lot of questions asked. Could you go down one by one? Boom, boom, boom.
Sure, I'll make a stab at a couple of them. The first, I'd like to make a clarification. Both Ms. Chapman and I are not from Oregon. We do love Oregon, but we're actually from Nevada. The second, there was a statement about using one weather station. We actually used all available weather stations because we relied on something known as the PRISM climatic data set. Those folks are from Oregon when they compile the data, but it's compiled for the entire United States. That's the data set that we use to assess the groundwater recharge. I think there was a little bit of confusion with the El Paso Basin scenario, as the one woman mentioned. We looked at that as a one-off scenario to see what would happen if there was reduced recharge coming from that region, but it wasn't included with specific graphs and so forth because the ultimate results were almost identical to the base or status quo scenario. We did, I think Jenny talked about the availability of data for the domestic wells. We did not have specific well construction information. What we did have from the Todd report is what is known as the freeboard amount, or the amount of water that is available on top of the screen. So we use that information, and again, it's on an average basis, not for specific wells, to make our final conclusions regarding domestic wells and the possibility of well failure into the future. So that's 3. And some of these others, I definitely have to go back and look at more detailed information.
I thought there were a couple that I also agreed with. There was one is that Ms. Thomas asked was, will the groundwater model described in the report be updated if USGS recharge study shows recharge totals estimated to be different from those in the report?
Oh, that's a great question. So, yeah, we've actually had a conference call with the USGS folks, and we said that we would be happy to incorporate that information. I was kind of alluding to it earlier that I didn't think the big picture would change, most likely, but there might be some nuances in terms of where the water infiltrates in the ground, so that might have minor effects on the model and its calibration. So we'd be happy to include it.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, sir.
And that's one of the things. This is, the DRI and the Navy. We've been meeting with the cooperative as well as the cooperative's TAC up to this point. So we are integrated with them and working with them moving forward.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing that. I was going to ask a question targeting that. You heard one of the gentlemen, Tony, ask, you said you don't have data on depths of domestic wells, and yet you make the claim that those wells will have significant functional problems or go dry within the next couple decades. How can you make that statement? Could you talk about that for a second, please?
That's what I was trying to respond to earlier. So we have information, from the Todd report about the average freeboard amount. So although we don't have the specific depth, what we know is how much, if you have a screen where the water comes into the well, we know how much groundwater is on top of it. So the freeboard amount is what's most important, because if the water level is, say, 100 feet above the screen, and it's declining on the order of 2 feet per year, then you would have about 50 years before there would be functional problems. So again, we made that statement based upon the information that was readily available in the Todd report. We can't make specific conclusions about specific wells because we don't have that specific well information.
Okay. There was a question Mr. McMurtry asked about how we could sustain without importing. I don't think that's your swing zone. Is that? Do you have a comment on that?
No, I wrote that. That's a really important question. I'd be happy to respond to that. I think his question was, and maybe I'll just repeat it just to make sure we're on the same page, but I think his question is, what is the sustainability amount, if you will? In Sigma, there's some language referring to that. And in my opinion, it has to be less than or equal to the groundwater recharge. So if we assume the groundwater recharge is 7,700 acre-feet per year, pumping has to be less than or equal to that amount, 7,700. Without import.
Without import.
So you'd have to make up the 21,000 or whatever it is if you wanted to import water.
I think there was another question I'm missing. Someone, Mr. I don't know. Okay, thank you very much. If there's any other questions, please, you guys are going to stay available? Okay, appreciate that. Any other questions from the board? Yes, sir.
I have one related to this domestic well question, and I don't know who it's for, but now that drillers' logs are public information, these questions about which and how much domestic wells will be impacted would seem to be answerable.
Someone said the county has that data. Is that true? The damn county.
Right. We did make an attempt to look at the county well records, and it was a not user-friendly database for at least for the uninitiated, and therefore that's why we defaulted to using the Todd basin-wide estimate. I would also say that our purpose isn't to go in and look at specific wells. The grid spacing, in fact, that Greg was talking about is 800 feet on a side, which isn't specific enough to get down to a well capture zone, head dropping to get to that precise. So I felt like the Todd information was good enough. In fact, what I would do if we can get into that database and query it effectively is just to double check whether things like that 75 foot is a good average, if it spatially varies around the valley. But I wouldn't encourage going in well specifically and comparing it to the graphs and maps, for instance, that are in this presentation or in the report, because you have to realize that things are averaged over almost 900 feet on a side, and a well is a lot smaller than that.
Sure, but with the driller's logs, the status of domestic wells in the valley could be better characterized
Absolutely.
than it is in the Todd report.
It's clear that the Todd report did pursue that deeper than we did. Their data are not in their report, but it appeared that they did some sort of sampling. So I don't know if they did that like by township and range. They selected, a certain number of wells out of each township and range and looked at them, or they did something. And so that would actually be the place to start.
Yeah, I guess my point is that since the Todd report was produced, those drillers' logs have become public information in California.
Yeah, it certainly could be evaluated in more detail.
Thank you. Okay, I see no other further comments or questions. Were we looking for a receive and file?
Yes.
Okay, so I need a motion to receive and file.
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion.
Second.
We have a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. Thank you to the Navy for allowing that to be presented.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
If I may, this presentation for the public and for the board, this presentation was posted, it is on the website, it was posted yesterday. Cool. So it's available to the public, and the Mr. Parker's presentation is now out there on the web as well.
Good job. Thank you very much. Brings us to special presentations, item number C. It's 11:30. Presentation by Larry Moxley of Kernco Home and Farm Water LLC on alternative water sources for the Indian Wells Valley.
Gene McMurtry again. I'll be filling in for Larry Moxley, who's here. I have good news for you. Apparently, you need to import water. You need 20,300 acre-feet a year to be sustainable at your current rate of pumping. We have a chunk of it. I don't have it all, but we have a chunk, and we'll tell you about it today. We're calling it the Fremont Valley Recovery Project. It's sponsored by Kernco Home and Farm Water LLC. Kernco Home and Farm Water LLC is a limited liability company owned or controlled by Keith Gardner, who's a farmer in the Tulare Basin. It's the Kern County sub-basin of the Tulare Basin on the west side of the hills. He's been out looking for a water supply to support his farming operation in that area. His goal, he has acquired, he owns or controls about 3,000 acres in the Fremont Valley, and he's looking for a water supply from that area. He wants to provide a new and imported water supply to his property on the west side of the Sierra Nevadas in order to reduce drought emergency impacts and to improve and maintain the Kern County economy. He wants to do that consistent with state policy, which requires that all waters of the state be put to reasonable and beneficial use and that you avoid waste. And he intends to transfer water for use where it's needed most. That's the purpose of this project. With respect to the state policy on putting water resources to beneficial use, I cite Article 10, Section 2 of the California Constitution. It says it is hereby declared that because of the condition prevailing in the state, the general welfare requires that the water resources of the state be put to beneficial use to the fullest extent of which they are capable, and that the waste of water be prevented in the interest of the people and so forth. That's also codified in California Water Code Section 109, where the legislature finds and declares that the growing water needs of the state require the use of water in an efficient manner, and that the efficient use of water requires transferability of such rights. So the legislature has directed the Department of Water Resources, State Water Resource Control Board, and all other appropriate state agencies to encourage voluntary transfers of water and water rights. Also in Water Code Section 475, the legislature finds and declares that transfers of surplus water can help alleviate water shortages, save capital outlay, development costs, and conserve water and energy. So the legislature finds and declares that it's in the public interest to conserve all available water resources, and that this interest requires the coordinated assistance of state agencies for voluntary water transfers to allow intensive use of developed water resources. And that's what this project is all about. It's a transfer of water to the places where it's needed most. With respect to drought emergency conditions, you know that the governor declared a drought emergency in January of 2014. It was continued in April of 2014. It continued again in April of 2015. And most recently, in May of 2016, he has issued his Executive Order B3716, making water conservation a California way of life. In that particular executive order, he made the following statement. These ongoing drought conditions and our changing climate require California to move beyond temporary emergency drought measures and adopt permanent changes to use water more wisely and to prepare for more frequent and persistent periods of limited water supply. What that tells me is that drought emergency conditions are not going away ever. Drought emergency impacts, particularly on Mr. Gardner's operations, the ongoing drought puts farmers' long-term investments at risk, heavily impacts low-income communities. It causes and threatens drinking water shortages. The solution, which is contained in the January 2014 drought emergency proclamation by the governor, includes the following. State and local agencies are encouraged to generate and expedite voluntary water transfers and exchanges to enable water to flow where it is needed most. You're all familiar, of course, with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. I'm going to layer that on top of drought emergency conditions that are motivating Mr. Gardner to seek an alternate water supply. You know that the groundwater sustainability agencies have to be formed by 2017. You have to have a plan by 2020 and full implementation by 2040 with 5-year milestones. And every critically overdrafted basin has to be brought into sustainability. That counts for the Kern County subbasin where Mr. Gardner has his farming operation. It also counts for the Indian Wells Valley Basin, as you know. Impacts on agriculture of Sigma, particularly on Mr. Gardner, is you either find a new water supply or you fallow ground. There's no two ways about it. And if you fallow ground, you lose jobs, you lose tax revenue for the county, you have adverse impacts on the local economy. So we're trying to find a new water supply. We think we have. This is the Fremont Valley Groundwater Basin. It's Basin 646 under DWR's Bulletin 118. You'll notice Basin 654. That is the Indian Wells Valley Basin, immediately to the north of the Fremont Valley Groundwater Basin. From a water flow standpoint, the yellow lands or blocks, those are the lands owned or controlled by Kernco in the Fremont Valley. And the arrows indicate water flows in that valley, in that area. You'll see that all of the water flows into the Cohen Lake bed. There is no water flowing out of that basin. The solid blue lines are observed water flows. The dotted blue lines are estimated, projected, not verified water flows. The dotted blue lines are in the Indian Wells Valley, immediately to the north of Fremont Valley. And that little connection, see where those two valleys connect? I wish I had a pointer, but there's a little line where they meet. Anyway, that's about where the dotted blue lines end and the solid blue lines begin. So I can't tell you whether water is flowing from Indian Wells Valley into Fremont Valley, or if so, how much it's flowing. But I can tell you that any water flowing into that valley is not flowing out. So we have a closed basin in the Fremont Valley area. So Fremont Valley, California is what we call a closed basin. Land ownership in that area is mostly federal. Some California City is there. There's some private industrial, and then there's Kernco. Land use is solar, industrial, private, very little agricultural use, and there is surplus groundwater available. Looking now at just the northern portion, if I go back here, I'm going to look at do a cross section about where the 646 is, and just look at the northern portion of the Fremont Valley. We call that the Cohen Lake area or the Cohen Lake subunit. You can see in red, I can barely see it, but outlined in red are the lands owned and controlled by Kernco. Outlined in black are industrial lands. I think there's some solar there. There's a racetrack. And the arrows indicate water flow in that subunit, and you can see it all flows ultimately to the Cohen Lake bed. And no water flows out of that area. California City is to the south of this particular subunit. It's separated from our project by the Randsburg Muroc Fault, if I'm reading that correctly. So the Cohen Lake sub-area, what we know about it, it includes the Cohen subunit, the California City subunit, 523 square miles. It's separated from the Indian Wells Valley by the El Paso and Garlock faults, which may be a water retard. It's bounded by the Muroc Fault to the south, Tehachapi Mountains to the west, the El Paso Mountains to the north, and the Rand Mountains to the east. The Randsburg-Mojave Fault is the boundary between California City subunit and the Cohen subunit, and the Muroc Fault is the partial barrier between us and Mojave. There is no groundwater outflow from this area. This is a depiction of historic pumping in the Fremont Valley. You can see that the green, I think, is domestic use. The red is California City Community Services District. You can see they're very small and fairly constant, represent about a 4,400 acre foot or so annual use today. The blue is historic agricultural use. You can see that in the, I can't read the numbers, but in the 60s or thereabouts, substantial agricultural production began. It peaked around the 1980s with 60,000 acre feet of sustained pumping, dropped off in the late 80s and early 90s, and it's all but disappeared today. The interesting thing about this slide, though, is that it shows that this particular basin can withstand substantial pumping or support substantial pumping over a long period of time. For example, 40,000 acre feet per annum could be pumped out of that basin for 20 years without significant problems. This is a depiction of the agricultural lands that were farmed in the 80s. The green is agricultural use in the 80s. You can see, by the way, the Cohen Lake dry lake bed actually had water in it. This is a picture from 1985. Green lands are in, the slide map on the left shows farming in 1985. Map on the right shows farming today, which is virtually non-existent. Historical groundwater extraction was primarily for agricultural purposes in the Fremont Valley, first recorded in '53. Peak groundwater production was about 60,000 acre feet. Today, the groundwater use is about 4,400 acre feet. Agricultural use went from 9,000 acres down to 160 acres. The natural recharge to that area is 15,000 to 17,000 acre feet per year. So if you subtract the annual use of 4,400 from the natural recharge of 15 to 17, you get a groundwater surplus between 10,500 acre feet to 12,500 acre feet per year. And as you would expect, if you have surplus water, groundwater table should be rising, and it is rising. It has risen since 1983, or the cessation of the farming operations. It's risen about 100 feet. Groundwater quality in the area varies. It varies from area to area. Ranges from about a 500 mgl of TDS to as much as 325,000 when you get down into the Cohen Lake bed area. And then it has sodium chloride, and I don't know what all those things mean. But from our perspective, we believe that the water, that we can produce water from the Fremont Valley of sufficient quality to put it in the LA aqueduct, and that's the key. This is the wrong slide. Darn. This is a close-up of lands that are owned or controlled by Kernco, which are in the vicinity of the LA aqueduct. And you can see this is I'll call it the Sun's property that actually abuts the LA aqueduct. The LA aqueduct actually crosses that property. And our intention is to locate our project wells on the Sun's property, not going south, but I just got the wrong slide here for some reason. Anyway, put it on the Sun's property. We have that property is currently being used or will be used for a solar project, but we have reserved pipeline easements and well sites for up to 17 wells. We think we'll only need 7 wells for the project to capture, store, and transport the surplus water, but we have plenty of spacing to do it. The intention of Mr. Gardner's original project, Kernco's project, was we'll take the water out of the Fremont Valley, put it in the LA aqueduct, send it to LADWP. They trade it give it to Metropolitan Water District. Metropolitan Water District relinquishes a like amount of water in the California Aqueduct. We pick it up in the aqueduct, bring it in through either Semi-Tropic Water Storage District, Rosedale Rio Bravo Water Storage District, North Kern Water Storage, or anyway, some entity in which Mr. Gardner has a farming operation. So we take it out of one part of the county east of the Sierras, and we bring it back in through the California Aqueduct west of the Sierras, and it services his farming operation. That was the original project. Then we came up, and for that project, we needed the 7 recovery wells, the pipeline to the LADWP aqueduct. We needed a transportation exchange with LADWP, a delivery exchange with MET, a delivery partner in Kern County, and a point of delivery agreement. Then we came up with this bright idea, a better project, an alternate project, to sell the water to the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority. If we do that, we have no MWD exchange, no delivery partner. We reduce impacts on the LA Aqueduct. We're going to put it in at Fremont Valley and take it out upstream at Indian Wells Valley. All of the water stays on the east side of the Sierras, which we think is the politically correct thing to do. We also think it really is a win-win scenario. We'll add a much-needed imported water supply, brand new imported water supply to the Indian Wells Valley of 10,500 to 12,500 acre feet. We'll sell it to you and generate revenue for Kernco, and then Kernco, instead of taking the Fremont Valley water west of the Sierras, they'll take the money and go buy a water supply over there. So we multiply our benefits for the Kern County economy, and we double our SGMA benefits. We take care of your SGMA problem, take care of our SGMA problem. We also noted that the Indian Wells area entered into a cooperative groundwater management plan back in 2006 that was signed on to by the Naval Air Weapons Station, the City of Ridgecrest, the Indian Wells Valley Water District, the East Kern County Resource Conservation District, the Bureau of Land Management, and the County of Kern. All of you signed this groundwater management plan, and objective number 5 in that plan states that the parties will consider, individually or collectively, projects such as water transfers, water banking, water importation, groundwater replenishment, and other programs that will enhance or prolong the groundwater reserves in the valley, and that the parties may consider joint acquisition, use, and operation of such projects and or programs, and that's what we're proposing. To implement what we have in mind, we're looking for a purchaser partner. We think that that purchaser partner should be the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority. We would like to enter into negotiations with the Groundwater Authority to acquire this Fremont Valley surplus water. We want to work with you, and we have nothing set in stone as to what this project ought to look like or how it should operate, but we'd like to work with the authority on developing a project description. Our thought is that Kernco will build, own, operate all the facilities in the Fremont Valley necessary to produce, transport, store, and deliver Fremont Valley water into the the LA Aqueduct, and that our purchaser partner, the Groundwater Authority, would build, own, and operate all of the facilities necessary to take water out of the aqueduct and deliver it into the Indian Wells Valley. And I have no idea, whether you want to deliver it to a treatment plant or recharge it in the basin, or how you want to do that. That's completely up to you. We'd like our purchaser partner, once we have a project description worked out between the two of us, to work with us on local outreach, both in the Indian Wells Valley and in the Fremont Valley. Believe me, we're not here to pick a fight with anybody. We're not here to create a problem for anybody. We're here to solve problems. But we know that projects have been proposed in the past, and weren't well received, and that there may be objection to what we have in mind. We would like to try and resolve whatever issues may exist and see if this thing can't work for everybody. We also need our purchaser partner to provide CEQA compliance for the project, and to make the whole thing work, we absolutely have to have the cooperation of LADWP to get water in and get it out. So we need our purchaser partner to work with us in obtaining that cooperation. Interested parties, of course, are the County of Kern. They want us to comply with their ordinance that you don't export water from the eastern side of the Sierras out of the county, and our project would certainly meet the criteria of that ordinance. We know that we will be questioned by California City, probably Mojave Public Utility District, perhaps by ABEC, and certainly by independent well owners, especially in the Fremont Valley area. Our intention would be, for purposes of CEQA, to attempt to develop a no-impact analysis. We think the project will have no impact on, because of its size and its location, we think it will have no impact on California City, Mojave Public Utility District, or AVEC. We'll certainly look at that. As far as independent well owners are concerned, if they're in the vicinity of our pumping, there may be impacts. Of course, we have to propose monitoring and mitigation measures to make sure that whatever impacts they suffer are mitigated and taken care of. With respect to California City, I just would point out that they are approximately, actually, if you only build your project on the Sun's property, they're more like 9 or 10 miles removed. They're pumping in their area on the south end of the Cohen subunit is about 10 miles removed from the area where we will be pumping. So, and there is this separation by the Randsburg-Mojave Fault. We think that there would be no impact on their pumping. We're certainly not at pumping at 10,000 to 12,000 acre feet a year. We're not going to change groundwater gradients enough for them to even notice, I don't think. But we would study that and do all the drawdown impact studies as part of CEQA. As far as a potential threat that we're taking their water from them, we're not going to do that. We don't intend to do that. We're only looking at the surplus water in the Fremont Valley Basin, 10,500 to 12,500 acre feet per year. I would point out that a California Water Code Section 106.5 provides that it is hereby declared to be the established policy of this state that the right of a municipality to acquire and hold rights to the use of water should be protected to the fullest extent necessary for existing and future uses, but that no municipality shall acquire or hold any right to prevent the appropriation and application of water in excess of its reasonable and existing needs to useful purposes by others. And that's what we're talking about doing. We're only taking the surplus. I know there was a project out there sometime in the past that was universally condemned and created lots of problems. I want to distinguish our project from that former project. In the first place, we are not mining native water. We're only taking the surplus supply. The former project was geared to remove 114,000 acre feet a year from the Fremont Valley. Our project only takes the surplus, and it's like 10,000 to 12,000 acre feet. So we're quite a bit different. Our project, they didn't restrict the place of use of their water. I think they were going to market it to LA or somebody. We're only using the water in Kern County, and quite frankly, propose to use it in Indian Wells Valley. We're taking a practical and common sense approach. We'll monitor and mitigate if necessary, and we're locating our project to minimize any local impact. There is potential, I suppose, for a banking program. If anybody's interested in exploring that, we're happy to look at it, but we're not, for purposes of our project, we're just talking about selling the surplus water. I don't know whether anybody's interested in a banking program or not, but we're not opposed to it. And as far and there may be ways to increase the yield. If you need 20,000 and we've only got 12 and you'd like another 8, I mean, maybe there's something we can look at, like a land fallowing program or a surface water capture program, or local compensation for increased pumping to those around the area. We don't preclude anything, but the project itself is just focused on the surplus water. And I think that's about it.
Thank you, Mr. Murtry. Appreciate it. I'm going to ask, we'll take the liberty, if this board is mine, and ask Ms. Oviatt to come up and comment on what you've heard today and taking this notional idea concept and what would be required if this board or this community was willing to try to develop this.
Thank you. Good morning. Lorelei Oviatt, Kern County Director of Planning and Natural Resources. So first, I appreciate the opportunity. I'd like to expand. I do know that area as well as the rest of Kern County. There are about 100 people living in Cantil, so there is a community there. There's another probably 70, the census said 69, but there's probably about 70 or 75 people in Randsburg. So there's actually a community there that also needs to be taken into account. I would, if you chose to be the lead agency, I recommend that you be a lead agency that does the EIR and not allow the applicant to submit an EIR, but instead use the model that is used in Inyo County, San Bernardino County, and Kern County, where the lead agency, meaning you, with staff, would contract for a consultant who would prepare the EIR while the applicant can review that. I just wanted to kind of put a bracket around Mr. McMurtry's comments about we doing, implying that the applicant does an impact analysis. I believe that there are probably many appropriate uses for this water, and I am only really commenting on the CEQA aspect of this and the fact to let for those of you who are not familiar with that area, to know that there is a community there. It's an active community, and they're very interested in what happens to their wells and what happens to their water. In addition, the racetrack is no longer a racetrack. Honda has not used it for many, many years. It's been up for sale, so that's vacant. And I would not call the over 350 megawatts of LADWP solar project a few scattered solar projects, okay? It's a very large footprint there. And of course, that means they don't use very much water, but LADWP has their own wells. Other than that, I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Oviatt. So I want to build a context that I understand, and hopefully I'll share with all of you. And so I want to baseline this whole deal. My understanding so far, Mr. Mukherjee, we've had several conversations for the past several months, me, Mr. Gardner, Mr. McIntosh, Mr. Moxley, and we've talked about this idea, and we discussed how lightning or how difficult water topics are in the Indian Wells Valley. But to my understanding, those conversations have gone no further, and the public here today and the public who is listening today are getting into the exact point where we are. I mean, we have not advanced this topic in any direction. We have not discussed with LADWP. We have not discussed with water storage systems. We have not discussed with anybody yet. What we're waiting for the public to also get together with us to understand the complexities and the issues and the needs of what we're doing so we can develop this plan together in a very transparent public setting. I appreciate the comments Ms. Oviatt made because there are impacts not only to us, but there are impacts to communities all in the Fremont Valley and all of the Eastern Sierras, Eastern Kern. And all those concerns need to be understood, to be discussed, to be talked about, and to be satisfied. So I just want to set the baseline for all of us here that there's no extraneous movement on this issue other than what we've heard today. And so that's the baseline. So what we've developed is a process here where we ask the board if they have questions before we go public. I have a couple questions, and then I'll defer the mic to several of you. Mr. McMurtry, if you'd answer these. You talk a lot about surplus groundwater. I know you're not a hydrologist, and maybe you can get some help here, but what is surplus high groundwater and what is safe yield? What is the definition of those terms? Do you understand those?
Yes, surplus. Well, the surplus water is over and above safe yield or demand. So if there's 17,000 coming in and 4,400 of demand, there's a surplus.
So
safe yield comes in when you used up all the surplus, and now you're going to start overdrafting. The question is, how much overdraft are you going to allow? Safe yield will determine if you're going to allow zero overdraft. Safe yield is whatever's coming in.
Okay. So my understanding of the project is, very simply put, is there's a safe yield in the Fremont Valley. You want to put that safe yield in the LA Aqueduct, and you want to cut deals with LADWP in the Indian Wells Valley where we can wheel that water off the LA Aqueduct. It's different molecules of water, but it's the same amount of water. Take it off the LA Aqueduct into the Indian Wells Valley and either put it to a hookup or put it to a banking system or put it to storage or do something with it.
Yes.
And there are no other parties.
Let me add one thing to that. I don't know whether this is possible or not, but we'll have the capability of putting in a steady stream supply, constant year-round, dry year, wet year, doesn't matter, inflow. You may be in a position to take water in lumps and wet year, and so you might end up with some kind of an unbalanced exchange.
Right.
Maybe get a 2-for-1 or something like that. I don't know whether LADWP is that flexible.
Right.
Probably not.
Right. But we've not had any conversations with the LADWP about this project.
No.
So nobody knows anything other than what we know today.
No.
So we don't understand a lot of stuff. We don't understand mitigation impacts. We don't understand adverse impacts. We don't understand community relations. We don't understand costs of infrastructure development, storage facilities, where we put it, if we can put it, how we hook it up, what the quality of that water is, how is it going to mix with the other water. There's more questions right now than answers. I mean, we could just go on forever with questions. I just want to make sure the public understands that this is a notional idea, that we are at the very seedling point of developing the concept.
Yeah.
I also think it's important for the public to be aware that Mr. Gardner has been generous, and Mr. Gardner is a businessman, and I think it's on us to move expeditiously with the conversation and with the decisions so that we can arrive at conclusions on what we want to do in the most expeditious manner possible and the most sensible. I think we owe that to the people who are out making this offer to us. So I think, Ms. Oviatt, what I heard you say is one of the things we'd have to do is an EIR. Correct? One of the next few things to solve those mitigation impacts and all those things. And you were suggesting that this board be a lead agency. I hate to make you walk all the way over there, Lorelei. No.
Sprint.
Take your time, hurry up.
Thank you, Lorelei Oviatt, Director of Kern County Planning and Natural Resources. That's what I heard Mr. McMurtry asking your board. I may have extrapolated, but I believe that was the request.
So one of the decisions we have to make soon is whether or not, as a GSA, once we're a GSA, is whether or not we want to take this on and do this EIR and understand all the costs and all the stuff that goes associated with it. So those are my questions, and I'd offer it to the board before we go public. Commander Longbottom.
Yes, sir. Just one question on slide. We spent some time here prior to your presentation talking about groundwater models and technical authorities related to numbers. On slide 18, where you discussed the natural recharge of 15 to 17,000 acre feet and the groundwater surplus, what technical authority are you using to generate those numbers?
I use Roger McIntosh.
I'm just curious. Thank you.
Roger McIntosh with McIntosh and Associates. I've been working on this project for about 5 years, and probably 4 years ago, GEI Consultants did a complete hydrological study of that entire area. There's about 3,000 acres out there, and they studied each of the properties. It ranged from Cone Lake, just east of Cone Lake, almost halfway to Randsburg, and all the way back to Sons and Holmes, which is around the Honda test track. So I have a complete report that we're relying on.
What was the name one more time? GVI?
GEI Consultants.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Ron Schnabel is the hydrogeologist.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions? Ms. Aaron, go ahead.
A couple of things. I understand you haven't had any discussions with LADWP on this yet.
No.
I guess my concern is it's likely what they're going to want is a 2-to-1, 1 acre-foot to Indian Wells Valley, 2 acre-feet out of Fremont Valley, or some such thing. And coming from Inyo County, what that would look like to me is it incentivizes DWP to maximize how much they take out of Inyo and Mono. So that would be a concern, I'm sure, for the Inyo board and probably the Mono board as well. So consider that as you discuss this with Los Angeles. The other question, and this sort of relates to Commander Longbottom's question, is 15,000 acre-feet of recharge to that Cone Lake basin. I'm skeptical of that, just based on what we know about Indian Wells Valley. About half that in a basin with access to the richer recharge of the Sierra Range front. It doesn't seem to line up. And if that 15,000 acre-foot estimate of recharge is reliant on the subsurface pathways that were depicted early in your presentation that showed pathways from Lake Isabella and the Upper Kern, I'm skeptical that that's a valid hydrologic basis for this project.
Well, again, I have to rely on Mr. McIntosh, but my understanding of the 15 to 17 is strictly precipitation that actually infiltrates into the basin. That it's not subsurface inflow at all.
Mr. Brown.
So to understand the chain of events, because we've done CEQA projects for the Water District. So first you'd have to come up with like the feasibility, and that would be based on cost. So how does that happen? I mean, do we just start meeting, somebody start meeting with you guys? Because you have so many pieces of the puzzle that need to be costed out, like the appurtenances for putting the water into the aqueduct and the appurtenances for taking it out, along with the agreements and stuff. So, I mean, it all sounds good, but is there like a flow chart of events that have to take place where you have this works and this doesn't work, triggers in that, or is that just based on how much we're all willing to pay for water?
Well, we haven't gotten that far.
Okay.
It's just a concept.
I understand.
And, I think the next step in the process would be, first of all, we'd like to hear an expression of interest from the group. If you are interested, then we'd form maybe a committee of your team and of ours, and sit down and start negotiating.
Start working on the details.
Yeah, and who's going to, what do we need, and who's going to pay for it,
right,
and how are we going to divide it up, and
right,
so forth. Yeah.
Okay.
And then once we get, I mean, we really have to get a project description so we know what we're talking about when we go to the public.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Anyone else on the board? Yes, ma'am.
I think he's coming to answer. Are you coming, sir?
I was going to add to that comment. First step is to see if there's interest. The next step is to start developing those discussions, putting together a project description that would go into the CEQA process. And if your board would take the lead on that CEQA process, then we would continue to develop those estimates and the program. There is a little bit of water quality that we'll have to take care of. Some of the water is below drinking water quality standards. Some is a little higher on the air from the area that we're proposing to pump from. It may be treated and blended to meet those water quality standards. But overall, if there is interest from the board, then we would start that process.
Thank you, Mr. McIntosh. Any other questions? Yes.
I do. I would like to understand if all this is exactly as it says. Wow, what an opportunity. I want us to do a lot of research and look at it. But I'm concerned about some of the past history of Arcero Farms, who was pumping from that area and quit farming because the wells had dropped, the water had dropped so much they could not afford to continue to pump, as I understand. And I'd like to understand why that is so different in that particular spot and what makes the rest of the Cantil area different.
Roger McIntosh again. The reason the Archeros stopped farming and stopped pumping was mainly because of transportation costs went up in the early 90s, and the demand for alfalfa, which was being grown on the property, subsided, and it was not economical to continue to grow alfalfa out there. Historically, they were pumping around 60,000 acre-feet a year, and the water table did drop. But since they stopped pumping, the water table has risen over 100 feet in elevation. Depth to groundwater from the area that we're proposing to pump is anywhere from 100 to 200 feet. So the aquifer is there. The safe yield is what we're talking about. Some of the past projects that were proposed were pumping, as one of the slides mentioned, 114,000 acre-feet per year, which was harvesting the water, and it was much more than the safe yield. What we're proposing is up to the safe yield, which is consistent with what is being recharged.
Are you going to share the studies that you have completed to determine that safe yield?
Absolutely. Actually, this study is available, and there are other studies, mainly done by USGS, that support this information and are used as references in this report. And as we go forward, we would share this information, and obviously, going into the CEQA process, some of this information needs to be updated because it's 2 or 3 years old.
I'm a little concerned in one respect that it looks like the golden fleece, and the other respect is that it gives us an opportunity to answer a whole lot of problems we have here. I don't want to start a CEQA process before we see all the data that you have. I think to spend the money on a CEQA process, which is not cheap and not easily, the money is not going to be easily found until we have some of that data that we can look at and say, I understand now, let's go ahead. I maybe think differently than the rest of the counties and the cities and the water district, but I really would like to see some of that data before we jump whole hog into everything.
Absolutely. Actually, it was part of the EIR for the previous project, but we can share that with you if the board is interested in moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think you're assuming that we'd be paying for the EIR. Is that assumed in your question?
I'm assuming that there's going to be monies that will be spent.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
I don't want to pay for it.
I'm with you.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, I would have a hard time expressing interest in this concept today. And the reason I say that is that I think we do need to be proactive in looking at import opportunities, ways to provide replenishment water to this basin. But this is just one proposal. I would like to know before I say, yeah, well, let's pursue this and work with this applicant. I'd like to know what other replenishment water might be available out there. This sounds great. It's close by, but it requires a very difficult deal to be done with LA, DWP. And Inyo County has concerns in terms of the water that would then come here for replenishment. I'd like to know if there's other other opportunities out there and just kind of give a broad look at what other potential replenishment sources there might be for this body to consider before telling Mr. Gardner, yeah, let's sit down and work out an agreement to start this process. And I'd also kind of like a better understanding from council, our council, in terms of what the potential risks are to this authority should this project go forward. If it's as good as it sounds and it's possible to do this, I have a very simple question: is at the point that they start pumping up to the safe yield amount out of Fremont Valley, which is now currently designated by the state as low priority basin that doesn't have to comply with the requirement to have a GSA and a GSP, does starting to pump all of the safe yield every year out of that basin, does that change their designation? And do they then have to create a GSA to do a GSP? And could that GSA then somehow restrict that project? And then what do we do? There's a number of questions out there that I'd kind of like to explore before we say, yeah, let's sit down and work out a deal in terms of how we move this forward, that I think is warrants for this body to kind of have a better understanding of what replenishment sources are out there. Is there another source of water that we could just negotiate a deal directly with LA to get them water? Work out a way that we could buy water from them from another source, and they could give us theirs. I don't know. Do we need a three-party deal or not? There's as you say, there's more questions than answers at this point. And then I have a very specific technical question for the lawyers in terms of, as you were just mentioning, in terms of if we were to move forward with this and to start the EIR process and to comply with CEQA, what I'm familiar with at the county level is that the applicant for the project pays for that. Yes, we might be the lead, we might contract with a consultant to do that, but there's an agreement that the applicant pays for that. And at the county level, we have a fee structure that's adopted by ordinance to recover those costs from the applicant. At this point, we've not gotten into any of those details in terms of our revenue structure, how we would charge. I don't know if it's simple enough with a JPA to just do an agreement with them that they'll say they'll pay us. It may be, I don't know, but I've got additional questions that maybe that haven't been raised at this point before I'm willing to say that I'm interested in this project. I'm interested in determining whether there are replenishment sources for recharge of this basin to help with the management of this basin. I just don't know yet whether I can say this project is the one that I want to pursue.
Is it fair to say that you're interested in importing water? You just don't know whether this is the
correct
the answer.
Bottom line, I think we need to look at importing water, but we need to explore all the options out there and not just jump at the first person that comes knocking at our door offering us some imported water.
Thanks, sir. Thank you. Okay, let's open up the public hearing. Anybody in the public wishing to make comment? I need you to slide to your right and then come on down and voice your opinions. And we're going to hold you to your 3 minutes because we've already been at this for 2 hours and 19 minutes, and we still got another thing to do. But today's been a big meeting, so I thank you for your patience and bearing with us. Usually we try to keep these shorter. Go.
Okay, Earl Wilson, Lone Pine resident. I wanted to bring up, and part of it got explained just a moment ago by Mr. Page, and the original Sigma maps had this big hole that was Fremont Valley. And over a year, I used to complain to Mr. Parker, why is this not designated to one of the GSA groups? Well, there was actually on the internet, there was an attempt to start one in Fremont Valley, and I forget the only name that I could come up with on the list. But it seems to me that this ought to be a GSA to GSA agreement rather than this group in Indian Wells Valley taking over that. So that would be California City and the county, I would think. The other thing was negative deck just got mentioned a bit ago. You're never going to fly a negative declaration down at Fremont Valley. The public could never stand for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Oh, What is the current designation for that water basin?
Thank you, sir. We'll find that out.
Good morning.
Morning, Sam.
Welcome to this. My name is Sophia Merck. I am speaking for myself and myself only at this particular time. I want to thank Lorelei for mentioning the other users in the Fremont Valley, the Randsburg Water District, the Cantil residents. Red Rock State Park is also in close proximity to that. The Desert Tortoise natural area. There's parts of California City. And, of course, there's mining operations in that part of the valley, too, that are contributing to Kern County. I think it is correct in thinking that we need to talk to GSA. There was attempts, and there still are attempts, for the Fremont Valley GSA. Tom Wheel, I've been to 2 of the meetings, and the last one was a telephone conversation, which I was unable to participate in. But I really think that since there is a question of negative impacts on the people that live in that community, I think that we need to be talking GSA to GSA, and they are trying to form one. I know that Randsburg has participated in it, and a couple other ones, Mojave. So I think if an EIR is done, that as a cooperating agency, Fremont Valley needs to be put on there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I forgot your last name. I was talking about you last time around.
Anthony Brown.
Yeah.
He's got a really good last name.
That limey guy, I think is...
I saw Mr. Brown. I said, they came up to you, Mr. Brown.
Mr. Chairman, my comment really isn't specific to Mr. Gardner's project, but it may in fact prove necessary and beneficial for his project. And it's more a general comment, and it's triggered by a statement you made that we need to move expeditiously. And I'd say today we've had over 2 hours of technical presentations. Yet this board has yet to formally establish the Technical Advisory Committee and also the Public Advisory Committee. And I think some of these discussions, the venue should have been first with that Technical Advisory Committee. The current TAC, that is to the Cooperative Groundwater Group, works extremely well. And it has been intimately involved in the salt and nutrient management program and in the modeling exercise. And so therefore I'd request and encourage you to expeditiously, I use that word strongly, formalize, establish the TAC, the PAC, and get those meetings started as soon as possible. And they can come to you with their thoughts and their recommendations on the technical issues that are now being presented directly to this board. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, Chairman Gleason and Board. I'm Don Decker. I would like to emphasize some statements that Mr. Harrington made, his skepticism about the 15 to 17,000 acre feet of recharge for the Fremont Valley. Just by similarity alone, that number is way high. And of course, that number is a crucial number that relates directly to the amount of water that the project that's being proposed could conceivably extract from Fremont Valley. The other point that I think needs to be made, the recharge for a basin is a basin-wide parameter, but when you pump locally, the project area that they're talking about, 17 wells in a few hundred acres, you're going to develop a rather substantial pumping depression in short order. And it is very hard to believe that that pumping depression will be benign to the residents, including California City. There's also the likelihood that you will end up, you will reverse the gradient to the Keene Lake playa, and you will probably see a steadily increasing salinization of that well field. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Decker.
Mr. Chairman and the IWVGA board, I'm Renee Westelusk, private citizen from Ridgecrest, and I have two concerns related to this project. The first one, I think it's premature. Our IWVGA is barely getting off the ground. We won't be official until the middle of February or such. And where is the money going to come to do an EIR and the other costs? And then the other concern I have are the people living in Cantil. I saw Kern County Board of Supervisors meeting 2 years ago on TV, and there was a woman who traveled all the way from Cantil, and she showed pictures of severe subsidence in the community, and they had sand blowing around as big as snowdrifts and buildings semi-collapsing, and she was warning about losing your groundwater. And I have concerns about taking water from that area if there's people suffering. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Westelusk.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Nick Panzer. I'm a resident of the city of Ridgecrest. I came here today to try to get a better feel for how much water is actually flowing through the Los Angeles aqueduct. It seems to me there's two pieces to this proposal. One is the amount of water in Fremont, which I imagine we could get our hands around fairly easily. But it occurs to me it might be a whole lot tougher to get our hands around how much and if any water will be flowing through that LA aqueduct. Now, it's my understanding that for most of 2016, water was not flowing through that aqueduct. So my request would be that at the next sort of session like this, we flesh out what's going on with the LA aqueduct. And I know we can't look into the future, but we know we're in a warming trend. There's less water. That's why there's less water coming through the aqueduct, as I understand it. So that's my request. Let's look at both sources, not just talk about Fremont. Let's talk about where the water's going to be coming through and if we're ever going to have water coming through the LA aqueduct again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Wes.
I'm Wes Kassenstein, we private well owner. And I think another question probably needs to be considered here, and how would we pay for imported water? There's been some very interesting back-of-the-envelope calculations done that have been published in the paper that show that with our like 7,000 to 8,000 acre-feet of recharge, that there's about enough there for health and safety for the citizens and maybe a little bit of irrigation for the citizens of the valley. And so my question would be, would we ultimately establish tiers where perhaps the folks, the safe health and safety uses of the water are paid for, they pay at a rate based on the current water we have in the valley, and perhaps the cost of any importation then would fall on irrigation, and that might be shared by the residents in any irrigation they do beyond a certain amount that you guys might calculate. And then any other irrigation that happens in the valley then would pay for the imported water. So I'm going to suggest that whether or not this is feasible for the valley depends upon really how we're going to pay for it. Who's going to pay for it? Will it be feasible for agriculture, for example, to pay their share, which might end up being all the water they use, if we respect this health and safety tier for the citizens? So my question is, it might make sense to put some preliminary thought into how this is paid for. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Judy Decker, be careful not to get the horse before the cart. You have barely established yourselves as a group. You are not yet a formal GSA. You're a GA. And you've heard it from other people. You need to establish your committees. You need to establish your bylaws. You need to establish how you're going to effectively be able to do things. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Anybody else? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Bring it back to the board. Okay, I'll stop. I think it's a great idea. I don't know whether it's feasible. I don't know if we can do it. I don't know if we can answer the questions. I have no idea whether a year from now this is going to be in the trash can or it's going to be a more developed concept. I don't think we're ready to make decisions on anything right now. I think today's purpose was to introduce a concept. I don't know. I've been working with Congressman McCarthy's office diligently and hard as I can to determine other sources of water importation, and to yet no avail. So it's not like we haven't looked elsewhere. And I'm sure other bodies are working with the congressman also to determine water imports. I think it's a very interesting idea. I think it's fascinating. I think it could prove significant relief. I think it has to be massaged with all the people that it's going to impact. I think the costs of the EIR are going to have to be discussed. Who's going to do that? Like I said earlier, there are more questions than answers, but I certainly am not in the mood to shun this opportunity. I'm in the mood to welcome it, to consider it, and to listen to the public discuss it, and we'll see where it takes us. Those are my thoughts. Anyone else? Mr. Brown.
Mr. Chairman. I agree. Us as the water district, we look at these things from time to time, and we have for decades. As far as capacity in the aqueduct, I don't think there's any right now. Everything changes all the time, and it's a very dynamic model. Obviously, we wouldn't enter a deal where there was no way to get the water after we made the deal. So I think all those obvious things would be fleshed out. I'd like to continue discussing it. I'm interested in every possible project because California in its entirety is doing the same thing. So if you have a potential supply of water, you're already better off than some people that have none. And then we have this equation has two good possibilities. There's a potential supply of surplus water, surplus being the key word, and there's a way to get it here. That's very simple. We're a very isolated community, as everybody knows. There's no rivers flowing by. So the aqueduct is an excellent transport. And so we have the right ingredients. I would like to further discussion. I think Mr. Brown's comment of getting these committees and stuff codified are excellent. So I'd like to maybe us look at our meeting schedules and stuff. Maybe we could accelerate these decision-making processes. As a board up here, we're talking. This is healthy. You guys are hearing. Very difficult to have a discussion about how to do something in this kind of a format. So however we can do that would be great. But yeah, I'm for codifying or finalizing our committee structures. The TAC is an excellent organization that's working perfectly right now, and I love it. So I'm interested, for me, and I think the water district, I think anybody who wants water is, and then I'd like to look at how can we accelerate our meeting process or have some kind of subcommittees of this board or something where people can still be involved, but we can start solving these problems or and asking more questions and coming up with more solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Anyone else? I'm going to need a motion to receive and file.
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion to receive and file. Anyone second it?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, moving on. Report by Lorelei Oviatt on solar initiatives in the Indian Wells Valley.
Good morning again. Lorelei Oviatt, Director of Kern County Planning and Natural Resources. I'll give a very short update. As a reminder for everyone, there are three components to this initiative. One is I'm working, representing Kern County with Sacramento in the Ready 2.0 process in bringing in transmission, and I believe we have significant movement on that and significant availability in the future of transmission, which is critical to any sort of renewable energy or energy upgrades for this valley. The second portion, the other two portions of this, the second portion is a land use initiative. So in our preliminary review of this, I would ask the chair if you could change the word solar to land use initiative. We're also identifying, and people are coming forward with some water treatment facilities and other sorts of ideas that also need electricity and also need power and also could help with solutions here. So I'm expanding this review to a land use review focused on how to maximize the use of this new capacity of transmission that we're bringing in to help incentivize and create opportunities for landowners to have low water uses. So that's the focus of this idea. This idea is a replication of what we're also doing up in the Central Valley portion of Kern County. So these are companion efforts. The third piece is looking at conservation and looking at if you have certain kinds of uses that come into the valley, could we streamline the conservation portion of it such that landowners could also be compensated for the conservation value of their property if there was something else they didn't want to build on it. The state of California has come to us. We have some people in Sacramento who are also talking to the Hewlett-Packard Foundation about giving us a grant. We are looking, as well as San Bernardino is also looking at this in another part of a RCIS, which is the Regional Conservation Investment Strategy, which is just passed by the legislature. I would not deign to try and explain it to you yet because I think California Fish and Wildlife is still trying to understand, but the idea is advanced mitigation, like a mitigation bank. And so we have a lot of interest in these three components. The last piece, which I will be providing to Mr. Christensen, the newsletter for our general plan update, which we will be distributing to everyone. We have sent it to the individual agencies, but I want to make sure this board has it. We will be spending the next 6 months on every second planning commission of Kern County's Planning Commission, which is streamed online, and also you can watch it on YouTube, dedicated to the planning, to the general plan update. And we've chosen topics. So a couple of the topic dates, March 23rd is going to be on water, and we're going to be looking at a variety of water issues and having a public discussion and public presentations, as well as April 28th, which is energy, as well as military readiness issues, where we'll be looking at completing our military readiness element that we have as a structure already in the general plan. The intention would be over the next, after the March 28th water, is to bring a site-specific ideas to a workshop here in the Indian Wells Valley in preparation for designing a project description such that we could then begin an environmental impact report. We are looking, I am looking forward to activating the, and I forgot the exact name, Mr. Christensen, Planning Advisory Committee, whatever committee that is, thank you, such that I could also bring the ideas to them. So we are making progress. We are getting funding. As a reminder, this is a Kern County effort and is being funded by Kern County through certain planning budget items that I already have allocated from the board. I look forward to your input and comments as we move forward, and that completes my presentation.
Thanks, Ms. Hoviat. Anybody from the board? Let's open it up to the public. Public comment.
Yes, I have a comment, or rather a question, Judy Decker. I thought this area had already gone through a land use adjustment a couple of 3 years ago. Are you going to look at changing zoning in the Indian Wells Valley again?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Lorelei Oviatt. We are looking at what kinds of new kinds of zoning ideas can we bring to help rebalance land uses if it turns out that certain properties have restricted pumping through a GSA? Our zoning ordinance is very rigid, and we don't believe that that provides enough flexibility. There are low water uses And we are interested in creating maybe some new vehicles, a solar overlay, other kinds of vehicles, that if a property owner, there's two options for property owners. One would be if for some reason their property is restricted in the future by the GSA. The other is if they decide to voluntarily do that, thereby freeing up their water, and whether this GSA decides to have selling of water transfers, that property owner may decide to have a low water use it for conservation, and let their water be sold off to some other entity in the valley. Our zoning ordinance right now and our zoning process is very rigid from that perspective and does not provide the amount of flexibility. So I am looking at a way that all property owners could monetize their land depending on various, how much water they actually are allocated. Once again, this is not unique to this valley. This is also going to be an issue in the Central Valley Tulare Basin GSA.
Thank you, Ms. Soviat.
West Katzenstein, private well owner. Another possible advantage of the kind of concepts you're playing with, if we can it's probably easier to ship power out of this valley than to ship water in. So perhaps even distributed solar on our rooftops, if we could supply power to DWP, that they might do desalinization at the ocean, and we could take an equivalent amount of water out of the aqueduct, maybe a possible spin-off of what you're proposing. Although I don't know if desalinization is truly a cost-effective way to proceed. But just a thought. If we can ship power out of the valley with the new transmission lines, maybe we can bring water in, convert that to water through desalinization.
Thank you.
Earl Wilson, Lone Pine resident. Just a warning. Be very careful with how you deal with your groundwater rights. Remember the Owens Valley. You don't know who or what is buying those rights, so be very careful.
Thank you, sir. Okay, the public hearing is closed. Back to the board. We're going for a motion to receive and file.
I'll make the motion again.
We have a motion.
Second.
We have a second. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that brings us to item number 6, discussion action for hiring special legal counsel for water and groundwater.
Did we do 5?
Okay, consent. If the board would like to discuss any item listed below, it may be removed from the consent agenda. A is the minutes of November 17th, 2016, and B is minutes of December 8th, 2016. Anybody on the board willing to pull those? It's open to the public. Public's closed. Bring it back to the board. Need a motion on consent.
I move. Oh, go ahead.
We have a motion.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Discussion action for hiring a special legal counsel for water and groundwater. Mr. Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Alan Christensen, staff member. You'd asked us some time back to come back to look at hiring a specialty outside counsel for water and groundwater to advise the board. Because those firms or individuals would be serving your board, we felt that it was appropriate to request that you form an ad hoc committee or an interview committee, however you'd like to do that, of 2 members of the board to interview those individuals or firms. We have we've attached materials for 2 firms that have offered their services. This is not, that's Rossman and Moore and then Best and Krieger. That is not a complete list. As of the time of preparing the agenda, we did not have materials for others. We know that there are other interested firms that would likely interview. So it's our recommendation that you appoint an ad hoc interview committee to interview those a limited number of firms and bring back a recommendation to the full board. That is our presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Anybody in the public have a comment on this issue? Item number 6. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board. Comments on hiring a special legal counsel for water or water.
I have a couple of questions. Through the chair, I'm not sure Is this necessary at this point in time? And I'm not saying it is, and I'm trying to understand the reason behind doing so, considering all the entities have their attorneys already working. Are we looking just so those attorneys are representing each of the entities and we're going to have somebody that will represent us? And is that not what we have Kern County Council doing?
Mr. Christensen.
Yes. I believe at a prior meeting we have discussed the concept that the attorneys that serve right now would continue to serve you with regard to the agenda and normal administrative matters. But the direction was that we would hire outside counsel to advise you as a board on water and groundwater, separate from those. You have 3 attorneys here today representing 3 agencies. They would continue to serve that way. But this attorney would serve you specifically for the entire board on those specialty issues. Not that these persons couldn't do that, but that was our recommendation a couple of meetings ago that they want some specialty counsel.
Was that a happy face? Or
It was
sad
a
face?
sad face.
Okay. Any other thoughts, Mr. Brown?
Yeah, I think I'm being brief today. Wouldn't we just submit, like, I don't know what the proper term is, like an RFQ or something like that? Or would we just look at all the agencies out there and send out letters? Or, I mean, do you need a ad hoc committee to do that, or can it just be a function?
I don't believe we do. I think between the attorneys that we have on board right now that have contacts, we're fine there. It's really just interviewing some individuals that could potentially serve you in that function.
Wouldn't you, I hate to give you guys more latitude, but wouldn't you guys be better interviewing other attorneys for water issues than us? I mean, I don't know.
That's purely up to you. Boards that I've worked with, or city councils or agencies, sometimes because that's their legal counsel, like to interview them. If you direct us, I'm sure we can do whatever you'd like that makes sense.
Okay, let me ask a couple questions. First, I want to establish the requirement, do we need a water lawyer? And what's the difference between this person and this entity and his scope of performance as compared to the lawyers we have here? Phil, can you take us off on that, please?
Sure. Let's start with, you guys are very lucky. You have 3 attorneys that represent the big 3 that all have significant water experience. A lot of GSAs aren't going to have that. But I think it's envisioned maybe between us that it would be good to have somebody who's independent, completely independent. I mean, I'm going to be back advising this GSA, but I'm also part of Kern County. So when it comes down to preparing the GSP and the intricate legal questions that will come up at that stage, I think the concept is it might be good to have an outside, completely independent legal voice that will be advising you. Sure, you will hear my aspect, my recommendation, my comments on some part that will come up in the GSP. You'll hear Keith's, you'll hear Jim's, but you'll have this 4th independent person who can also chime in. I think that was what was envisioned back when we first started putting together the JPA, because this actually came about and was discussed over a year ago. So that's sort of the vision that we had, but that doesn't mean it won't change.
How much is vision going to cost?
Yeah.
Right, for the first year, I don't think there's going to be much. I mean, you're going to have to get past the technical stage and really start working before you're going to run into these legal issues that we would be looking to that special counsel for.
So the value for this person, the way in my mind, is that he's a water lawyer. That's all he does.
Yes.
He works water. He works Sacramento. He works the state, the feds, everything. He is an expert on water and water law and can guide us and navigate us through helping us make decisions and comparing to what other GSAs are doing so that we can make better informed decisions with regard to water, which may be outside the scope of your capabilities at the present time, or any 3 of us. Is that a true statement?
Yes.
I'm not trying to be diminutive and all.
Yeah, no. I hear what you're saying, and I think my personal vision of it is when we get a complicated legal water issue, we're going to ask this attorney for the memo that says what he believes the answer is, and then it's going to be passed through us too, and we will be commenting, and you will hear my opinion as Kern County Deputy County Counsel to you as a general member of what I think of that memo. So that's sort of the concept.
Why do we need to do this now? Is there a need to go out now because this talent is going to flush out and go in other places, or what is the value to hiring, for example, Tony Rossman today?
Two things. First, if something wild comes up that we haven't envisioned, we've already got him set up. Second, I believe San Bernardino was asking for counsel quickly at one of the past meetings, so we were trying to meet that. And third, there could be a brain drain. This goes back to the engineer questions we've talked about before, where the state is doing stuff that is brand new, and I don't know if there's enough brains out there to do what the legislature has asked everybody in the state to do. I mean, that's just bottom line. There is that.
Okay, my thinking is that I think we need to form a committee that's going to explore this opportunity. I think we have to identify persons who have talent and interest in supporting us. We have to understand the cost structure, and we have to understand the scope of performance of this individual. And then we need to make that committee needs to make that recommendation to this board at some later date so that we can then make a decision on whether we need to bring that person on. That's what I think.
Agreed.
I can't make a motion. I can't make a motion because I'm the chairman. At least in Kern County, I can't make a motion.
I will move that the authority create an ad hoc committee to address this issue.
Do we need to name names?
Yeah,
Alan is nodding.
Let me guess who's going to be on this one. Okay, who's going to be on that board? Any volunteers? Okay. Me and who else?
I'll volunteer.
Okay, Peggy, you and me. Okay,
I
so
will add that to my motion, that the ad hoc committee be made up of the chairman and the mayor.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. We have a motion to have an ad hoc committee composed of the mayor and myself to develop a interview process and develop a plan for hiring outside water counsel. Is that the recommendation you're making?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Can I ask a question? Since, Bob, you had asked whether, I assume that the question was attributed to San Bernardino County and whether it was you or Mr. Lovingood, but would you want to be on that? Can we have 3 people on that committee or not? I mean, that's...
We'd have a quorum
can't?
issue if we have 3 people.
We're getting several. The room is shaking over here.
Okay, all right. I just want to see that your concerns were addressed and you have that ability in the question. It's not that I don't want to serve, but I'm just wondering if...
I'm in the same mode, and I'd be thrilled to serve, but I'd also be thrilled to relinquish if that's
yeah.
How about you and Bob do it?
Okay.
Peggy
okay,
and Bob.
Is that Bob, you volunteering? Way to go, Bob.
You can do it on the phone.
Yeah, I would have to.
That's okay. That's fine. I appreciate the difficulties with you participating, but I really would welcome your insight and your value to a conversation.
I can make that work.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I will amend my motion.
And it's me and Bob. That's the motion.
I'll second the second amended motion.
Who made the motion? Bob. Good man, Bob. Okay, we have a motion of second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, moving on. Item 7, discussion action to consider financing alternatives for the IWVGA. Mr. Christensen.
Mr. Chair and members of the board, Alan Christensen, as we've mentioned in the past, one of the challenges of a GSA or JPA, in this case, which is the legal structure, is paying for a plan, a groundwater sustainability plan, in addition to all the administrative monitoring costs of that activity. We have one-time contributions sitting in the bank. We have some grant funds that we'll begin to start drawing on, but those will not be enough to meet the needs of a plan. We have some more grant funds coming later, but we don't know that that is not enough to, or a grant opportunity is not does not pay the bills. And it is our belief that Sigma anticipated fees would be assessed to users of groundwater. However, that would be done. I have this already. We have. I've outlined a couple of different choices that you have, although they have not been fleshed out about with regard to how you would assess or how we could generate revenue for the groundwater authority. Because these decisions are because the information is complex and maybe new for some of you, we thought an ad hoc committee to discuss them before we come back to the board would be appropriate. So it is my recommendation, and I think our staff's recommendation, that we ask you to appoint another committee. I'm sorry we're doing that to you, but we did feel that at least a meeting or two to go through the issues of how to generate revenue, what are the options of the board. One of the issues that I mentioned in the board report is time. There are certain property-related fees that have to be assessed on property tax rolls. Some of you know how that works. And if you don't make that cycle, then you have to wait the following year. And so the other reason for having an ad hoc is we would prefer not to have to wait another 30 days because we meet so infrequently. We would wait every 30 days to have another discussion on those things, and we think it's more efficient to do it that way. So it's our request that you appoint a couple of persons from your board to work on financing options to bring back to this board. That could be done very quickly, but we felt that was the most appropriate way to do that. I'm sure that the attorneys can answer any questions with regard to process or with regard to options, but really we're just talking about a process that would get things going. Be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you. Anything from the board before we go public? Yes, sir. Bob, and then...
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to get some clarification from Alan. My recollection in prior discussions was there was a possibility in the budget of having a consultant who would come in and do a fee study for us. Are you suggesting that this ad hoc committee would decide whether to hire a fee consultant or just to work with staff and council to evaluate the options and the best one to recommend to the board?
Through the chair, the latter, your second, not to hire a consultant at this point, but to talk about the whole range of issues. What consultant would be needed, depending on what path you take, would determine costs associated with that. So it would really just be to get things rolling. Our thought was originally that we would hire a consulting firm immediately, but after more discussion internally, we felt like we needed to step back and go a little slower. I'm saying slow down, but I'm saying speed up at the same time. So I hope.
Thank you,
Mr. Brown.
Wouldn't Sigma be the driver on our choices? And if that being the case, wouldn't we just list all those choices? And then secondly, how it seems like I know that we want to do things quickly, but it just seems if we don't know what our costs are going to be, it's hard to kind of drive that equation. And maybe it's a mix of all the above and different ratios. I could think of 10 different ways to come up with money, but it obviously has to be based on the law. And so first thing is, do we need to do it right now? Second thing is, should this be one of those action items for the advisory committee because they're going to be part of the equation? In other words, maybe this could be a discussion, one of the very first discussion items, because it's by far the most impactful of anything that we're going to do in our entirety. So, just a question.
If I may, Chairman.
Yes.
I think we should, as we're looking at this ad hoc committee is not going to be looking at rates. It's not going to be looking at any of the components that come up with rates. Our initial meetings with the ad hoc committee are going to tell you what are the legal forks in the road that you can head down. be it the Sigma path of Section 10730 or Prop 218 path. So it's really to find what path you want to head down and to tell you what is involved in those paths. Some discussions that are legal that I would not like to have in a public meeting. So that is really the purpose of this. Whether we're going to have a rate study person later or not, those are issues for a later date. This is really, what is the path? Are we heading down Section 10730, Sigma path, or are we going to head down Prop 218?
Do you have to do one or the other, or can you do both?
They are exclusively different.
I know they're exclusively different, but if you want to derive income.
You can follow some of Prop 218 if you wanted and sort of morph them together. But Section 10730 of Sigma says regulatory fees for preparing a GSP are not subject to Prop 218. That's what it is saying.
Yeah, this is a pretty technical issue, and there seems to be some disagreement over what governs this. It's definitely expertise I don't have. And we've got a letter from Gresham and Savage representing Meadowbrook supporting Director Kingsley's recommendation at our last meeting to convene some public workshops on this matter. And maybe the task of this ad hoc committee could be to organize those, determine what information needs to be brought to this board of directors so we can make some informed decisions about what the law says, what we want in a rate study, so we can move forward with this in an informed manner. I don't think really what Gresham and Savage is expressing support for here is much different than what we want to do, what we want the result of our ad hoc committee to produce. So maybe that could be the task, the work plan for this ad hoc committee is to outline what subject matter would be addressed in that public workshop and get it out here so we all understand the lay of the land on this matter.
Can I interrupt for a quick second? Would that be better served by being studied by the PAC or by this ad hoc committee?
I guess ultimately it would get into the consideration of the PAC. What I was suggesting as a first step was determine what information would inform everybody's decision, PAC or board or the public, whoever, on how we move ahead with determining what an equitable fee structure is.
Okay. Any other thoughts? I'm going to go to open the public for public comment, and then we'll take it back to the board for comment.
Joshua Nugent, representing myself this time and Nugent Farms. I would like to request that this board, which has assured us that stakeholders will have meaningful participation, work on the PAC and the TAC. There were several agenda items where you talked about forming ad hoc committees for financing, outside counsel, and hydrologic consulting. But I didn't see any agenda item that discussed the work being done on forming the TAC and the PAC and the requirements for getting on those boards. I'm asking you this because I will most likely be personally signing checks from Nugent Farms to fund the actions of this board. And so I would request that the meaningful participation that was promised by this board all throughout the process and required by the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act be provided as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nugent.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, through the chair. Derek Hoffman for Meadowbrook Dairy. You have to bear with me a little bit today. I'm going to echo what Mr. Nugent just said, what Josh just said about forming the committees. We submitted a comment letter. I think each of you have it in front of you. It's already been discussed a little bit on this issue. And I raised this issue at the December meeting, the issue of using an ad hoc committee, which is a private, not a secret, but a private committee with a handful of staff to address issues that could impact every single pumper and property owner, or both, in this basin. And for that reason, and as we stated in our letter for today, these issues need to be addressed even at this early stage in the public. That's our view, because of the important public policy issues that we're dealing with here. And so part of that process is a filtering. There shouldn't be a preliminary filtering of options. Bringing this discussion item out into the public early will allow you to consider a full range of options. It will give the public an opportunity to participate on these all-important issues. The second issue that we raise in our letter is that the state of the law is actually not clear. It's not settled on what constitutes a Proposition 218 fee or charge. In fact, Kern County has submitted its own amicus brief, which is a friend of the court brief, to the California Supreme Court in a case that's now pending, specifically on whether certain types of fees are subject to the strict requirements of Proposition 218, which, for those of you in the room that may not know, it requires a public process, a public notice, and there are substantive limitations to that process as well, as far as imposing fees. So when the staff report says that a certain fee is subject to Prop 218 or not, that question hasn't been decided by the California Supreme Court, and the brief that Kern County submitted specifically urged the court to decide the issue specifically for the purpose of interpreting those very provisions that Mr. Hall is citing in SGMA, for the purpose of SGMA implementation. So the reason I say this is the benefit of having public engagement on these issues, bring these issues together, will give everybody, especially those who are going to be paying for this, the chance to weigh in. And for those reasons, we support using an open public committee, such as the Policy Advisory Committee, which is very soon to be established. And again, we appreciate having representation on that committee, as do many others in this room, including each of you, your respective agencies. And so using a committee to address these important issues, not an ad hoc committee that would meet in private, but an open public committee of the board, is what we would ask this board to consider doing. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman.
Stan Rotora. I have two comments. The first is I would like to encourage you to put this before the PAC as soon as possible prior to any filtering. Second of all, today we talked about, or were told about, two options, two paths. I would like to suggest that there's a third path. Everybody in this room, if they live in either Kern, Inyo, or San Bernardino County, is already paying taxes for management of groundwater. It is certainly true that none of those agencies has paid a lot of money to actually manage the groundwater, but nonetheless, I believe it is their responsibility to manage the groundwater. So therefore, I guess I would like to suggest that at some point in time, we may need to have fees on the water to supplement what the counties actually provide to the table. But the first in line to paying for at least the initial years before we know what we're doing ought to be the county, who is already getting paid taxes. Now, my feeling is that groundwater, or water in general, is just as important as fire protection, police protection, or anything else that is a priority within the budgets of the counties. I would like the counties to consider very strongly reaching in their pockets and paying for what they're already being paid to manage. Thank you.
I want to say thank you, but I'm having a hard time. I think there's some issues there, but we'll have to resolve those. Go ahead, Ms. Decker.
Yes, my comment is a little different. Having had experience for many years on the water district, I would like to say that the water district system of how they do things gets things done. They decide which issues are important to them and form committees to cover those issues. Those committees are open to the public. I would like to suggest, not just in finance, but in other areas where you have issues, and there are many, that you form committees and get started with those committees meeting and discussing the issue and then bringing it back to your board. I know you're going to form a PAC and attack someday, hopefully soon, but I think this is a way for you to get going, is to form, some of you call them subcommittees, but in actuality they're a committee of the board, a committee of the whole, not a committee of the whole, a committee of part of the board to work together in a small group and to get things moving off the ground and going forward. And the other comments by Mr. Nugent and Mr. Hoffman are excellent.
Thank you, Ms. Decker. Okay, I see nothing from the public. Close public hearing and bring it back to the board for a discussion.
Sir?
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to see us send this to the PAC. I don't want to see an ad hoc committee meeting. I want the PAC developed and meeting as soon as possible, and I would like to see public input on this.
Chairman, if I may again, I want to remind the board that the questions we're going to be asking this ad hoc committee are legal. They're not policy. They're legal, and they have to do with the liabilities that would be associated with the city if we make a wrong choice on fee structure. Mr. Hoffman's letter, it's actually written by Mr. Oistich, is very much on point. We have a Supreme Court case. The county is an amicus brief in it. I'm wanting an ad hoc committee to provide you legal advice so that you understand what these paths entail and what the different issues are. Now, Mr. Hoffman is saying here is he believes sections 10.730 of SIGMA is unconstitutional. And I need to be able to talk to you about that with an ad hoc committee. Otherwise, we would have been going into closed session. Frankly, with his letter, we could almost go. We could go into closed session now rather than an ad hoc. He's opened up that door. But our process and our thought was an ad hoc for this one legal issue. Workshops, rate studies, all of that stuff that would be really for the PAC will happen, but we need to take that first legal step.
Okay, I understand what you're saying.
Mr. Chair, the board should be aware that a standing committee can go into executive session to discuss legal issues. So that would not be a hindrance in and of itself to the board if they decide to form a standing committee versus an ad hoc committee. I think that should be clarified.
I don't understand that. Could you come up, speak to the microphone, and say that, please?
In terms of the board's decision whether to form an ad hoc committee or a standing committee to discuss financial issues, that's a board decision, and that's your decision. But you should be aware that if you do form a standing committee, it will not prevent the legal team from discussing legal issues with the standing committee in closed session, because the water district does have 5 standing committees that discuss various issues, and if legal issues come up that pertain to issues that the standing committee is dealing with, we go into closed session. It's not just the board that can go into closed session. It is also a standing committee.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that, Mr. Orth.
The other thing that comes to mind that I think we should consider regarding that advice is that, okay, yes, if we form a PAC, we populate it with parties that are interested in this basin, and they go into closed session to discuss legal issues regarding financing. Some of those people that we expect to be on that PAC have already threatened litigation if we don't involve them in a certain way. So we would be sharing legal advice with someone who potentially could be suing us. So I think that's something we also need to consider is, yes, the PAC could go into closed session, but you potentially could have people on that PAC who could litigate if they don't like the way the GSP turns out.
So what is your recommendation?
I don't have a specific recommendation. I'm just saying that I'm just adding to Mr. Worth's advice that yes, the PAC could go into closed session, but you potentially could have people on that PAC who we would not want to share certain legal information.
I indicated standing committees, the 2 board of directors that would be appointed to a standing committee on finance. They are able to go into closed session with legal counsel. I don't think I'd invite all of the PAC to that meeting.
Okay. Well, I interpreted standing committee to include PAC as well, because this board is establishing
Standing committee would be the two board administrators.
Ad hoc committee. Oh, ad hoc. So you're saying standing is ad hoc.
Standing committee is subject to the Brown Act. Ad hoc committee is not.
Mr. Hall.
Yes, Chairman Gleason. At this stage, I think we should change the recommendation from an ad hoc committee to a closed session at the next board meeting to discuss these legal issues, so that all five general members can hear the issue at the time. I mean, my vision was that the large water user over there on the board, which is the water district, would be on the ad hoc committee so they could hear what the issues are, and then whoever else it was. But since we've now got counsel out there saying Sigma is unconstitutional, I think we should just go into closed session and have the full input of the whole board.
So what's your recommendation for this particular issue?
That we do nothing at this stage, and we'll just have a closed session next meeting. And we talk about the legal issues, and then from that we will work from there.
I'm confused enough to agree with that question. I'm not ready to make an intelligent, informed decision at this present time on this issue.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we continue this discussion to the next, or do you want to continue or table? What did you prefer in terms of getting into closed session?
Table.
Okay, I recommend that we table this discussion at this time.
We have a motion?
I'll second.
And a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Where are we? Number 8, discussion of consulting services agreement with Parker Groundwater for hydrogeologic and technical services. We're almost to the end zone.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'll be as brief as I can.
Thank you.
Mr. Parker has served really the entire group of agencies, even though, and for some months, well, a year and a half, Tim? Longer than that? 2 years? 2 years? Before I came on. And he's currently employed contractually through the county. That worked fine. However, we formed a groundwater authority. We are working towards a plan. The county has lent Mr. Parker's services to this board. Because of that, we felt it was appropriate that we ask you to, really the recommendation is to direct staff to enter into a contract for Mr. Parker's services with this body rather than with the county. So really shift his contract, if that's what you desire, to your Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority. And if you direct us to do so, we would bring back a contract that we could negotiate with Mr. Parker. That's a
Thank you, Mr.
recommendation.
Christensen. Open up the public hearing for your thoughts.
Me again. I believe that you should go through the same process with your hydrologist consultant that you are going through with your special legal counsel. You should put out an RFQ and see what you get.
Thank you.
I have no objections to Mr. Parker, but I think you need to do it, I will call it the right way.
Anyone else? Public session is closed. Board member comments. Yes.
Tim's been with us. He was with the water district before he was with the county, and the county stole him away. And that was really nice of them because they started paying for him. So we really appreciate that. I think it's totally fair that for 2 reasons. Tim's been with us a long time. He has a lot of history, intimate knowledge of what we're doing, and he's very good at what he does in presenting clean information without a bias, and I really enjoy that. So I would be perfectly willing to make the motion to bring Tim's contract under the payment of this agency that we've formed.
Thank you. My understanding is that, well, first of all, Tim has done a remarkable job. Tim has brought significant credibility. I'd go so far to say that we wouldn't be here where we are today without his consult and sage advice through the course of everything we've done. So I'm very significantly appreciative of what he does. He's in a position of conflict, however, because he gets paid by Kern County, he gets paid by the water agency, and sometimes he's got to take a position. So I'd be yelling at him to go left and he wants to go right, and it's difficult for him. His job is to go left, the way I tell him. I think this GSA body would be better served. I think Tim would be better served, and he'd be more open and able to help us if he was under the auspices of this GSA board. I think that would give him some credibility to speak on geological or geohydraulical, whatever it is, issues that pertain to us with more freedom, more flexibility, and more reliability, and not worrying about being conflicted. So I'd be supportive of this effort. So my understanding is that the county funds, instead of paying county directly, would filter through the GSA board to Mr. Parker's contract. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, we'd have to figure out, how that would work and what transition time, when that would cease. But yes, that's another question I think that would come along with it. Okay. But I think for Mr. Parker's, my goal was just to get that started, and those other questions can be answered along with that.
Okay, Mr. Parker, any comments?
Well, I just say that.
Is your mic on?
Let me just say that I really appreciate the comments I've heard, and I've really appreciated working in this area and would like to continue to do so and serve this board, but it's at the pleasure of the board, so thank you.
Thank you, sir. Bob.
Mr. Chair, you mentioned trying to provide him with the flexibility and to avoid conflicts. So if a contract is brought to this board at a future meeting to contract between this agency and this authority and Mr. Parker's firm, would there be a conflict provisions in there that would require him not to work for any one agency on this that's a member of this authority, or anyone else that might come into conflict with what this authority would be working on?
We have not gotten that far in any discussions. So I don't, because I know he has a relationship with the water district, so it's hard for me to comment on that, but we just haven't had any specific discussions about that. I think that would be part of the package, figuring that out.
Yeah, I would recommend that you have those discussions with him, because I would want him to be able to consider that. I mean, he's got a revenue source right now from more than one agency, and he's got to think about that, and I don't want him jumping in without understanding what we expect from him. The other question I had, Mr. Chairman, was in looking at the current, I know this is draft, scope of work, there appears to be a number of things that are administrative in nature, and I'm familiar with Mr. Parker's assistance through the GSA formation process and the assistance he's given this authority since we formed. I'm not familiar with his background of actually working as an administrator in government, so I'm not sure how much experience he has with that. The other question I would have is the scope of work description under GSP. I'm not clear in terms of whether we would be, what the recommendation that would come to us at a future meeting would be to hire Mr. Parker's firm to be that engineering hydrologist consultant that works with the PAC to develop the GSP, or is he going to be the project manager that would be managing another environmental hydrologist consultant, engineering consultant that would do a lot of the technical work? I'm not sure whether the proposal that would be coming back to us would be for him to actually serve that technical role, or is he playing more of an administrator, project manager role? It's not clear to me from the scope of work that's presented in the item as to which he's going to be playing.
Mr. Christensen.
Again, I think we're sort of, in a broader sense, we're creating a government agency as we go along. It's a very good question. We haven't had that really detailed discussion with Tim about his role, and I think that's I don't think there's any question about qualifications and certainly these duties. It's just what's the appropriate role. So again, we would bring something back. Tim could probably comment. We really haven't talked about this, so it's hard to say.
So the recommendation then would be for you to come back with an agreement between Mr. Parker and this board that this board would be willing to approve. I think it's a good idea.
I have a question, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Right now, there is no fiscal impact because the county is going to roll over the money to pay for him. But when he is hired by this group, is the county going to continue that on infinitum? You know, and if let's say he's paid $300,000 a year, I mean, you're well worth it, right? But whatever his pay is, how do we assume that liability when you decide it is not in the county's best interest to keep that going? And I would like to understand, how much is it going to cost? Because that is something that clearly ought to be a cost to this board.
If I may, those are excellent questions. Again, sometimes it's chicken and egg. You know, we're not sure where we should start, but we would have as part of what we would bring back to you, we would have a transition, or as best we could, a financing and transition plan that would identify answers to those questions, because they are. We just haven't got to that point where we can answer that yet, but we will do our best. I will tell you this: we are not going to. We have to have a certain revenue source to pay for anybody's services, including Mr. Parker. So that will be answered in what comes back to you.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Parker, I thought you had something to say.
Yeah, I did want to just add one thing that hasn't been mentioned, and that's the grant that the county has under the stressed counties. And there is $90,000 of that goes towards, it's a $250,000 grant, $90,000 of that goes towards the USGS recharge study. And the rest of that is to be applied basically for initiating the groundwater sustainability plan. So there is a funding stream that can be used initially, at least. And that was kind of the intent of the way we structured the grant that Alan and I put together. So that begins it. And then the next step will be sometime this summer putting out an application to get funding for a groundwater sustainability plan. And that's regardless of who you hire for hydrogeologic consulting or engineering consulting. I mean, that's where the funding stream for the plan development should come from, I hope.
You don't really make $300,000 a year, do you?
No.
Oh, but he's well worth it.
Okay, we got a thorough review. Do we have a motion? Do you need a motion?
Yeah, staff's looking for, I understand, is looking for direction.
Direction, yes.
So the motion is, read the new motion that we just discussed.
I will move the staff recommendation, which is that this board directs staff to prepare an agreement with Parker Groundwater for consideration at the next authority board meeting.
We have a motion.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, number 9, discussion direction on projects or objectives of the IWVGA.
Very quickly, Mr. Chairman and Board, I want to direct your attention to number 8, which is in bold. One of the items that we have added to this to our list of sort of things to do. Well, let me go with one first. We have filed to be a GSA. That is completed. Now, it's not completed in the sense that the state has found us to be exclusive, but sometime in March, whatever our date is. April 4th, thank you. It was April 4th. That's 90 days from the application when it was accepted, that we will officially be a GSA. We assume that's going to be the case if somebody else objected or filed over the top. They could do that. Assuming no one does, that will be official April 4th. So that's a highlight. But down on number 8, we would like to bring back for you at least a request for proposal to a draft to start looking in. We've talked about roles and responsibilities and bring back a RFP for hydrological engineer consultant for the GSP. We need to start grappling with that. So it's really just to let you know what we intend to bring back to you. If there's any opposition, we'd be happy to entertain that. But that was, I just wanted to bring that to your attention. That's all I have, unless there's questions about the memo.
Okay, let's open the public.
No, Longbottom has a question.
Oh, Mr. I'm sorry, Commander.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go for it. You're a key guy. Good to see you.
So it's probably going to be a tradition for me to comment on this because my background is plans of action and milestones, with the military. And so I think I would ask if we can add to this a little bit in that we don't really have our end state in mind. We stop here somewhere August 2017 and we have some goals, but I would recommend that we put on their January 2020 GSP adopted and start working backwards. How much time do we think we need for the to debate it at this board? How much time do we think we need for the PAC to go do what they need to do? Work it backwards and see where we should be today. And I think that might drive a couple of things. Are we doing these meetings frequently enough, given the amount of progress we're making from meeting to meeting? I think we're being short-sighted from this perspective, and that we don't have that end in mind. That's all I have. Thank you.
I think that's a really good comment, and we'll comment about that when the board comes back to comments. But let's open the public hearing for this particular item. I see Mr. Brown.
Mr. Chairman, Anthony Brown again. I just want to comment on something I heard there, that there was a discussion as to whether there should be an RFP developed for an engineering firm to start working on the GSP. Obviously, I'm involved in these projects throughout the state. You are nowhere near ready to go out for an RFP for engineering services. You haven't had one single formal TAC meeting yet. You have yet to get a contract with Tim to start working with the TAC on what might be in that GSP and what might be in that scope of work for an engineering firm some point in the future to start working on the GSP. Let's get the TAC and the PAC rolling before we start putting the cart before the horse, as we heard from Ms. Decker earlier on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Stan Rotora. Item number 5 says board approval of bylaws. Now, I have a draft set of bylaws that I believe is dated like June of last year, something like that. I haven't seen an update to the bylaws since then. My feeling is a lot of the things that we've been discussing today are directly related to the bylaws, and there are sections in the bylaws that talk about all of those things. And I think that document really does need to be completed, and you're not going to be able to approve it in February if there's not a draft out very soon, and that draft needs to be reviewed by all of the agencies. So we're already way behind in terms of getting anything approved, and it will answer many of the questions. And I'd also like to thank the commander for his, I haven't heard POA&M mentioned since I retired 8 years ago. And it worked really well for the Navy, and I think it would work very well for this organization as well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I don't see any further public comments, so we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board. I like this POA&M idea. I mean, how do we develop that? Commander Longbottom, any thoughts on how you might want to volunteer to help us get this thing going?
That's about to happen. I mean, it's a lot like a construction contract that we do on base. Is you need something built by a certain date, right? So in this case, we need a GSP approved by a certain date, and we need to do some brainstorming on what does that entail. And so you just start working backwards. And as you start working backwards, you're going to start getting tangents coming off of it of other multiple things that are going to have to happen. And so you end up with a timeline. And I would argue, based on the progress, no offense to anyone, but the progress we've made to date, that as you work that backwards, we should probably be much further along than we are today. And I think what that then will illustrate to everyone is that, to a lot of folks' points, there needs to be some earnest in getting these PACs instituted, and maybe for a period of time, holding these meetings more frequently so we can get through needed business.
Can you take a leadership role in establishing a POA&M with our staff?
Absolutely.
That'd be great. Okay, so you can coordinate with the commander?
Yep.
And what else we want to discuss about this project and objectives? Will a POA&M, Commander Longbottom, satisfy the requirements for establishing direction, projects, and objectives of the IWEGA? I think it will. You?
Absolutely. Ironically, we kind of have it on here as bullet number 3, strategic planning and goal setting workshop. In my mind, that's kind of what we're talking about here. But we need to get something rough.
Yep.
And then go from there.
Thanks, sir.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, there was just mention of the goal setting workshop. Is that I had a question as to whether that's intended to be part of the regular business meeting date, or is that intended to be a new date we have to find that works on everybody's calendars in February?
We had, Mr. Chair, I was trying to be as brief as possible, and I'm glad somebody brought it up, because as a staff, we thought this would be a good idea. We actually thought it would be better outside of a regular meeting, that it would be an open public process where we start doing that kind of work, where just laying out in detail a path with a number of different objectives, and in a different setting than this, where there's a lot of action being taken. So it would be outside our suggestions be outside that. I think that was pretty clear amongst most of the staff, that we would not as part of this regular meeting, but another meeting, again, public.
Thank you, sir. So we need a motion on this. Commander Longbottom, you want to?
I didn't realize I'm allowed to make motions. I am.
You just can't give us.
You can't vote on it.
Oh, okay. I'd make a motion that we develop a poem.
Yeah. Is that correct? Am I correct? Or
he could make a motion that one of you 5 general members could then mirror.
Okay, good. Let's
and
do
get
that.
a second too.
Okay, let's do that.
I recommend we make a motion to establish a poem for this board to get to GSP by January 2020.
I will move that.
You didn't say mirror.
Second.
We got a motion and a second. Please cast your votes. Aye. Anybody opposed? Closing comments. Time reserved for comments by board members and/or staff to identify matters for future board business. Ladies and gentlemen, your thoughts.
Director Kingsley sends his regrets for not being able to be here today. He's in Sacramento at a RCRC meeting.
Thank you, sir.
I have a couple. I'd like us to look at having meetings on the first Thursday and the third Thursday. And if that's my suggestion, and I'm going to verify that it's available at this time, unless you give me another time so I can make sure that this facility is available.
Okay.
Okay. The second thing, I want to thank the Ridgecrest Area Board of Realtors. They sent me some information, and a question I'm going to ask you is, how do we grow in a overdrafted basin? How do we continue to grow? The Navy has given the Board of Realtors some information. I'm going to share this with you. Both the Admiral and the Captain addressed the City Council about 3 months ago, I think it was, and they talked about hiring 600 new people this year. We were kind of surprised at that, because it was a lot of people, but we didn't know how many were retiring, how many were leaving, how many are just moving around from a contractor stage, because what we're looking at is what is the impact on the city. And so we got an answer. The Board of Realtors was able to receive an answer from Richard Craycraft, who is the Public Affairs Officer for NAWS, Channel Lake, and he said they're expecting 200 new employees this year. They need for 2017, and 100 of them will be junior professionals with a starting wage of $60,000. These junior professionals tend to escalate quickly, and the average the average age of the senior engineers will be coming is between 35 and 55. I would like to share with you some information that was shared by the Board of Realtors. Last year, they sold almost $94 million worth of real estate in this valley. The year before that, it was, I'm going to have to do this again, almost $67 million. We are growing. We need places for these people to grow. We either say we have a gate on the valley that goes this way and is open this way. We have new people coming in. How do we deal with that kind of growth? How do we understand the impact of us on a overdrafted groundwater basin, and how do we grow? We have homes. There's a whole report. I will ask the Board of Realtors to put it online for us, and if we have their permission, I'm sure they will give it to us, but I want us to be able to answer that question. How do we grow in an overdrafted basin? That would I would like that to be addressed, because clearly we cannot look at conserving our way. We use about, as was pointed out by Mr. McMurtry, and it's been done here, about 27,000 acre feet a year. We have a recharge of 7,700 acre feet a year, according to the Navy. We have a potential impact of additional ag growth. If you look at the Navy's plan on the bottom of page 14 of this, they say that by the year 2025, there's going to be 35,000 acre feet of water used by ag. If that is the case, and whether those figures are right or wrong, it's clearly more than the 24,000 that we all are using. We have to address that issue. Is it by importing water? We have, according to the USGS, almost 2 million acre feet in storage. That cannot be part of the sustainability issue. So how do we grow? How do we address the fact that we need to keep the people employed at the base, have new people employed at the base? Without the base and without their employees and with the businesses that are here because of the base, we need to make sure that they're able to stay. I want us to be able to address that clearly, succinctly, and understand we must grow. How do we do that?
Thank you. Mr. Brown, any thoughts?
No comments now.
Mr. Page?
Yeah, two things. At the last meeting, and I don't know, Alan, if you had a chance to find this out, I apologize for not asking before. I had a question about the revenue that this authority has in the bank, whether that fund was in any kind of interest-bearing account, or if it was, or if it wasn't. I don't know if you were able to get an answer on that yet.
I did not get an answer. I believe it is not in. I'm not sure that fund is not allocated, but let me get that for sure. I will email the entire board. I meant to do that, and I did not.
Okay. And then the other thing that I wanted to let my fellow board members know is that the regularly scheduled meeting on the third Thursday in March, both Supervisor Levingood and myself are otherwise committed that day. It's our San Bernardino Council of Governments annual city-county conference in Lake Arrowhead, and so we will be unable to attend that regular meeting in March.
Thank you, sir. My closing comments are that I knew this was going to be complicated. I knew this was going to be difficult. I just have no idea. Every day I come in and it's getting more. It's like a mushroom crowd getting bigger and bigger. I agree with the mayor that we need to have increase the frequency of our meetings, because we're just overloaded. I mean, we've been here 3 hours and 43 minutes, and we really haven't scratched much today. We've done a lot, but not nearly what we need to be doing. I agree with comments about the pack and tack. We get to prioritize those and get those bylaws established and get them moving. And those are my closing comments. Everybody else had their chance. So I'm ready to adjourn this board till February 16th, 2017, at which time I'd like to make that referral to develop a schedule for bi-monthly meetings for that board. And with that, go Patriots.